Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had Pheonix mutation quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku was as normal as you could get. She had a passive and useful quirk, a loving husband, and a best friend, who was even PRGNNT with her. What wasn't normal, however, was her own PRGNNCY. No matter how often she told herself, and her husband, that everything was okay, it wasn't. More often than not, she'd wake up and immediately had to run to the bathroom to throw up everything she'd eaten the day prior. It's just morning sickness, she said to Hisashi one morning after her worst bout of sickness yet, but deep down she knew it wasn't just morning sickness, there was something wrong. That fact only became more clear as her PRGNNCY dragged on. She barely slept at night, tossing and turning until the sun woke. Her weird cravings consisted of items no sane person would ever ingest, bird seeds. Then there was her LTRSND which, no matter how long the doctors looked, they couldn't get a good view of the baby. Hisashi grew more and more concerned for his wife as the months dragged on until, finally, the due date came. He'd rushed Izuku to the hospital as soon as her water broke and sat dutifully at her side the whole time. He didn't even care when she squeezed his hand so hard he thought it broke because it was over. Their baby was here. And then, everything became clear, the weird cravings finally made sense. Their baby, their son, had wings. Midoriya Izuku, as they decided to call him, was an abnormality in their otherwise normal family. No one in Izuku's or Hisashi's family had a quirk even remotely related to what Izuku now had. But, no matter how odd it was, Izuku was their son and they wouldn't treat him any differently. It was hard, at first, to raise a child that could take flight at a moment's notice, and Izuku didn't make it any easier for them. He was excitable, and when he got excited, he'd flutter his little wings, that now had brilliant reddish-orange feathers, and would take off. They had to put him on a leash when outside to prevent him from flying away, but, after some quirk counseling and training, his surprise flights became less frequent. Another learning curve was his diet. They couldn't feed him like any other kid because his stomach couldn't digest regular baby food. They had multiple times where Izuku would throw up or fall ill due to this. So the quirk counselor set a meal plan for him that would fit his unique palate. Izuku was less than pleased to be told that Izuku would likely need to eat worms in his early months if she and Hisashi couldn't afford the listed items, which they couldn't. There was a lot of things they couldn't afford for Izuku. Tailor-made clothes for his wings because apparently wings aren't a common mutation. The diet, of course, specially produced food for babies with bird mutations cost a hefty amount, so they made do with mashed up fruits. Lessons for flying, wing mutations are uncommon, therefore finding an instructor is harder. Overall a lot of hurdles to jump though, but they would do it. Anything for Izuku. The only thing that wasn't a struggle for the parents was finding friends for Izuku. Inko's friendship with Bakugo Mitsuki provided a friend as she had given birth to a son of her own, Katsuki. Katsuki and Izuku took to each other quickly and immediately became impossible to separate. Inko wasn't complaining, just meant she had more time to be with her best friend and Izuku was happy. Time had passed in a blur and, before they knew it, Izuku was 3 years old with his 4th birthday just around the corner. Inko and Hisashi were already planning for said day while Izuku was excitedly fluttering around talking about heroes, something he often did nowadays. Then he brought up something neither of the adults had thought about. "I can't wait to get my quirk," he had squealed while brandishing his All Might figurine around. "Me and Kaken are going to be heroes together." When he got his quirk, he said. They knew what his quirk was, his wings. Though they supposed they never told him that directly and they wouldn't be today. They'd let him be happy for now and who knows, maybe he would manifest a quirk. "What kind of heroes will you and Katsuki be?" Inko said instead, letting the toddler babble about the different types of heroes. This was nice. She wouldn't ruin it. Izuku woke up bright and early, scrambling out of bed frantically like he'd miss the big day if he stayed in bed any longer. What was so big about today? It was his birthday. He was 4 now and he'd be getting his quirk any day now. Kaken already has his and it's so cool. He hopes his quirk will be just as cool. But first, he had to go wake his mama and papa. So he dashed out of his room, forgetting the important step of getting dressed, and pushed open his parents' bedroom door. Papa was already up and dressed, much to Izuku's delight. "Papa." The man instantly turned to face him and a bright, warm smile slid onto his face. "How's the birthday boy?" He strode across the room to scoop the green-haired boy up into his arms, lightly toss him up and down while Izuku giggled with glee. He might have gotten a bit too excited as his wings began flapping and he wasn't falling back towards his papa. Hisashi, used to this behavior, grabbed hold of his son before he could go flying away. Are you excited for today, Birdie? MHM. He nodded ferociously as he waved his arms around, needing to move. Mama said we're going to see Kaken and Auntie Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru and we're all going to the park and then we're going to get ice cream and then dash. Hisashi cut him off with a chuckle as he placed his little boy down and ruffled his hair. We'll be doing all those things, but first I need to wake Mama up. How about you get ready and we'll all have pancakes? Izuku hopped eagerly in place, practically flying out of the room to his own room. He threw on the clothes his mom had set out for him the other day, a pair of teal cargo shorts and his favorite all-might shirt. He was just pulling on his socks when he started to smell the telltale signs of his papa's pancakes. Papa learned to make them when he was in America, Mama told him. He didn't make pancakes often, saying they were too sweet to have every day for breakfast, but Izuku loved them. He especially loved putting maple syrup on them or even chocolate syrup, if Mama let him. But today was his birthday so they'd have to let him and he'd definitely be sure to put extra syrup on them today. Just thinking about his breakfast made the boy's mouth water and he was running out of the doorway faster than he should have been, which is probably why he ran right into Inko. The woman quickly grabbed a hold of him so he wouldn't fall back on his butt and let out a little giggle. Careful, Izuku, don't want you to get hurt on your special day. Sorry, Mama. Izuku tried to pry himself away from his mom, but Inko wasn't letting him leave without a hug, and so the winged boy was swept into her arms for the biggest hug. Mama. Stop. You're squeezing me. He complained, but the bright grin on his face betrayed how he really felt. The green-haired woman could tell this, so she didn't release him just yet. Let me love my baby. She gave one last squeeze, where Izuku's little wings flapped desperately for freedom, before relinquishing him. Happy birthday, baby. She laid a gentle kiss to his forehead then stood up, knees cracking with the effort. Izuku waited for his mama to stand to her full height and skipped, more like glided, to the kitchen with her following behind. Hisashi was just setting everything on the table when the two entered, smiling at them as he set down a plate of 3 whole pancakes in his spot. He leapt up onto his seat excitedly, grabbing the syrup and drizzling a copious amount on them. Slow down with the syrup, Birdie, or we're not getting ice cream. Izuku immediately set the bottle down at his papa's words to begin cutting up the pancakes. Be easy on him, Hisashi, it's his birthday. Inko scolded him as she took hold of Izuku's utensils to help him cut them, handing them back when she was done. She let a smile slip onto her face at her baby boy stuffing his face. She was definitely going to need to clean him up after he was done, but for now she'd enjoy the peaceful moment with her family. They had taken a little longer to get to the park than they initially intended since Inko had to clean Izuku up from breakfast. But they were at the park. Izuku scanned it for Kaken and easily spotted his friend kicking the ground lazily. Kaken! He yelled, flying over to the other boy. Izuku, where were you? Kaken dodged away from Izuku's attempted hug. You took forever. They were only a few minutes late, Katsuki. Mitsuki scolded from where she was moving to hug Inko. If you're so impatient to play, go on. At her dismissal, the two boys rushed off, Izuku being able to beat Kaken to the monkey bars thanks to his wings. The blonde huffed in annoyance at being beaten and tugged Izuku out of the air by his shoe. I bet I can climb the most bars without my quirk. I'm sure you can, Kaken, you're so cool. Izuku beamed at his friend, who just shoved him away to reach the first bar. Of course, being only 4, Katsuki couldn't reach the bar. This was a common occurrence, so the green-haired boy simply grabbed hold of Katsuki under the armpits and flew up until his fingers came into contact with the bar. I didn't need your help. The blonde snapped and started to swing on the bar. Of course not, Kaken. He landed in the space where his friend once stood to wait for his turn. Though his rest was short-lived when the other boy tried to leap to the next bar and slipped. Izuku flung himself forward, intent on catching Katsuki, but overshot and ended up under him. The two fell into the wood chips below with a thud. They weren't down for more than a few seconds when Hisashi came running to check on them. We're fine, Uncle Sashi. Katsuki insisted, trying to brush the adult off. Are you sure? The wood chips didn't hurt you? Masaru now asked, turning to Izuku for an answer because he knew Katsuki wouldn't be honest. We're fine. Izuku chirped, grabbing hold of Kaken by the armpits again and flying off before they could be questioned some more. Want me to drop you onto the slide like last time? Hell yeah. So he did. The sun had started to set, so the Midoriyas bid their goodbyes to the Bakugas and went on their way back home. Izuku was feeling pretty tired from the day of play with his best friend, the ice cream only refreshing him for a bit longer until the energy too was gone. Now it'd be time to open presents, cake, and then he could go to bed at last. They arrived home and Hisashi set his keys into a tray by the door before nudging the sleepy Izuku towards the table while Inko pulled the cake from the fridge. The green-haired boy yawned loudly and wanted to just rest his head on the table, but Inko had set the cake in front of him so he couldn't. In his sleepy haze, he hadn't noticed his papa slip away until he returned with an armful of presents. That woke Izuku up really fast. His favorite part of his birthday, aside from kakin, presents. He made grabby hands for the biggest box, which earned him a laugh from his papa. "1 second, Birdie, I have to place the others down." The man set the gifts on the empty space next to his son and, with the opening, Izuku dragged the big present towards him. "Or don't wait." He shook his head fondly. "You should know by now that that doesn't work." Inko giggled as she took the seat on Izuku's other side while the boy was absorbed in neatly unwrapping the gift. His patience with the wrapping paper was rewarded with the limited edition, Silver Age All Might figurine. He gasped in delight and shook the box around excitedly, feeling a swell of joy in his wings. Wait. In his wing? The swelling feeling got bigger and more uncomfortable to bear, then, it stopped. All Izuku could feel now was heat. Aizawa Shota didn't like phone calls. Actually he didn't like a lot of things, but phone calls at 4 a.m. on his day off were definitely up there with his most hated things. With the heaviest sigh, the dark-haired man peeled himself off the comfort of his bed and snatched his phone from the nightstand to check the caller ID. If he didn't like regular phone calls, then he despised phone calls from Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. He groaned in annoyance. So much for getting a good night's sleep. He threw the covers off himself and got out of bed as carefully as he could, making sure to not wake his boyfriend, before answering the phone. Wadash, he only got the first few syllables out before he was cut off by the detective's panicked voice. "How fast can you get to the Muzutafu apartment complexes?" The sound of sirens in the background was enough to get the young pro-hero moving to put on his costume. He didn't like the urgency in Tsukachi's voice, it could only entail bad things. "I can be there in 20. He grunted, tugging on his jumpsuit while rushing through the apartment towards the door. "What's the situation?" the man questioned as he zipped up the suit and set his capture scarf into place atop his shoulders. "A woman called the station an hour ago, said her son's quirk manifested. We got on Sendash. Get out of here, your fire will only make it worse." Tsukachi cut himself off to shout at what Shota could only assume to be Endeavor. There was a long moment's pause, which the hero used to exit his apartment and begin his journey to the complexes. "We got on scene as soon as we could, but the building was engulfed in flames. A fire quirk," he mused, leaping over rooftops with practiced ease. "How are the residents?" Backdraft was able to get the ones from the neighboring building out, but the main building's flames aren't going out. "We suspect that the kid's quirk is feeding the fire, making it impossible to put out." Shota nodded along, now being able to see thick, black smoke billowing in the distance. "You need me to go in and find the kid to erase his quirk," the pro stated, sliding down a building's gutter to land on the ground of an alleyway and continued his run to the buildings. "Yeah, Backdraft is clearing a path for you into the caller's apartment. Find him when you get here." Tsukachi hung up just as Shota rounded the corner to see the blazing inferno that was once people's homes. Fire trucks were stationed by each building to keep the flames at bay. Police were making a perimeter in order to keep a gathering crowd from danger. Paramedics were tending to the injured while firefighters brought out more civilians. Overall, it was chaos. Shota pushed through the crowd to reach the officer keeping the crowd calm and flashed his hero license so the officer would let him through. She did, with a little difficulty since the media tried to squeeze through as well. Once past the barrier, he scanned the scene for the pro-hero, Backdraft. He spotted him standing on the ladder of a fire truck, spraying the fire creeping through the opened window and marched over with little to no questions from others on scene. "Backdraft!" he called loudly to be heard over the sirens and roaring fire. The hero turned to him as Shota ascended the ladder towards him. "Are you Eraserhead?" Backdraft asked, keeping his arms towards the flames to douse them. "I was told to clear a path for you. Come on." He didn't wait for confirmation of the information as he climbed into the burning building, hoses on his arms still locked on the fire. Shota moved his scarf to wrap around his nose and mouth in order to filter the fumes before following after the other hero. The stench hit him regardless of his coverings. It wasn't just the smell of smoke that made him stagger, but the unmistakable smell of burning flesh that seemed to fill the whole apartment. Whoever was living here was long dead now. Unidentified male by the door. Backdraft's voice cut through his thoughts and he refocused on his surroundings to see the other hero kneeling down beside a corpse. He put his fingers to the body's neck, but there was no point. It was obvious that the man had died and, based on the head shake Backdraft gave, he was right. They didn't say a word to each other as Shota stepped further into the room and Backdraft moved away from the body to the next room. He spared a glance at the man they declared dead before he followed after Backdraft and he almost ran into the other pro when he did. "Wadash!" Backdraft shushed him, freezing in place as he seemed to listen for something. Shota followed his lead, straining his ears for what Backdraft must have heard. He was about to keep walking after a few seconds of nothing, when he heard it. Crying. The two heroes rushed towards the noise, pausing at the heartbreaking sight before them. A little boy, with bushy green hair and fiery red wings that seemed to glow in the firelight, was on his knees, desperately shaking the burning body of a woman. The longer he looked at the scene, the more it hurt. The boy had accidentally killed his parents and he was trying, in vain, to wake his mother up. Then Shota remembered the call he'd had with the detective. A quirk manifestation. That's the whole reason he was here. He activated his quirk, hair rising from his shoulders as his eyes flashed red before he blinked again. The quick activation was enough to stop the flames blooming from the boy's wings instantly. Though they weren't in the clear just yet as the apartment was still ablaze. "Take the kid, I'll be right behind you," Backdraft commanded, and Shota didn't need to be told twice as he reached to pick up the kid. He tried to separate the child from his mother, but the kid's grip didn't waver and only got tighter. "No!" he cried, clutching onto the woman like his life depended on it. "She needs me. Kid." He had to think of a way to get the child to let go. I need to take care of you first, then we'll take care of your mom." The green-haired boy's resolve didn't waver and he realized he'd have to force them apart. "I'm sorry, kid." Shota grabbed the kid's hands and pried them off his mother's clothes before hauling the boy into his arms, all while the child screamed, "Mama! No! Mama!" He had to focus on his task or he'd break down right there at the desperation in the kid's voice. No kid should sound like this. No kid should have to hold their mother's corpse for over an hour. He closed his eyes for a second to recenter himself, before he made a break for the window. He could feel the flames eating at his clothes as he ran through them, but he kept pushing until he was at their entrance point once more. A firefighter was already waiting for them and he passed the, now exhausted, kid to them and waited for them to move further down before climbing out of the ruined home. He could hear Backdraft above him the whole way down the ladder and then behind him as he followed after the firefighter holding the boy. The paramedics swarmed them the moment they were in sight, taking the tired boy from the firefighter and laying him down on a stretcher. Shota watched them as they rolled him away and didn't take his eyes off them, even when Tsukachi approached after speaking with them. "They said he's suffering from quirk exhaustion, but otherwise fine," the detective stated, now standing beside the pro-hero. "They also said that you should ride with them." That took Shota off guard and made him turn his gaze away from the boy to look at the other man. Why? He wasn't the kid's guardian, he couldn't ride with him, so why were they inviting him to? "You're the only one who can cancel his quirk in case it activates again." And now Shota felt like an idiot. Of course they needed him to keep an eye on the kid, of course. How'd he miss that the kid had a quirk strong enough to light a building on fire? "Right, I'll be off then." He sighed, making his way over to the paramedics as they just finished loading the winged child into the ambulance. They helped him in and he sat on the open seat next to the gurney, placing a hand on the railing of the bed. He wasn't going to be sleeping tonight. Madam President made it her business to know everyone's business, which is why she wasn't surprised to find a full report on yesterday's most notable events on her desk. What she was surprised to see was a file next to it with the words, "Project Underground Candidate." Project Underground was a work in progress, only recently pitched at a meeting 2 weeks ago, and not much has been finalized on said project. So to see a file with a potential candidate before a proper plan was in place, well, she'd be lying if she said she wasn't impressed by the initiative. She settled into her chair, pushing the report to the side with one hand while the other pulled the file towards her. Flipping it open, she was shocked to see a boy with red wings so similar to hawks, with the only difference being the orange dusting the tips of the feathers. If she wasn't interested before, she definitely was now, and it only got better from there. Madam President wasn't interested in the name or age. No, she was interested in the quirk and what it had managed to do. The day it manifested, it burned down a whole apartment complex and damaged the surrounding buildings. Horrible, but oh so perfect. This quirk covered the only weakness their other project, Hawks, had: fire. She needed this quirk. Project Underground needed this quirk if it were to succeed. She could already feel the plan forming in her brain as she kept reading through the incident report and the boy's statement. A way to draw him in. Check. Something to keep him in line. Check. A project that only had a pitch was now a fully formed program designed for their new asset. Now there was just the matter of getting the asset in the Hero Commission's custody. Shouldn't be too difficult now that the biggest hurdles were put down in the fire. All that she had to do was make a little call to Child Protective Services and ask to adopt, simple as that. After all, who would say no to the commission? Izuku woke up groggily, eyes opening briefly before screwing shut at the harsh light. His head hurt, like really hurt, and his wings felt warm, too warm. He whined at the uncomfortable sensation before it was suddenly gone. He remembered that feeling. The heat being snuffed out, hands clutching clothes, her clothes, crying as he's dragged away from her. His eyes shot open as he sat up quickly, uncaring of the pain it caused in his head. His mama. Where was she? The boy whipped his head around every which way to search for the familiar green hair or even the pink of her favorite cardigan, but nothing. Why wasn't his mama here? And where was Papa? He couldn't see his Papa either. Then he saw black hair. Papa. Kid, you need to lay back down. But, that voice, that wasn't his Papa's. Who was that? Through his blurry vision, he couldn't make out the face of the man now standing beside him. The man that was definitely not his Papa. He could only blink a few times to try and clear away the fog clouding everything. By the time the cloudiness did fade, the strange man had managed to get him to lay down in, what Izuku could now see, was a hospital bed. Why was he in the hospital? And why did this man not look like a doctor? The man, in question, was dressed in an all-black jumpsuit with a weird-looking gray scarf and some utility belt. Who are you? He asked skeptically, inching away from the man ever so slightly. Mama told him to be wary of strangers and Mama wasn't here to protect him from them, so Izuku will be strong for her. The man seemed to notice his hesitance towards him and took a step back, hands held up in a peaceful manner. My name's Eraserhead, I'm a pro-hero. At the word hero, Izuku shot up once more, stars practically shining in his eyes. You're a hero? I never saw you before. Are you not very popular? Or are you new? You look young. Maybe you just graduated? Are you a sidekick? What hero do you work for? What dash? Slow down, kid, you need to breathe. He hadn't even realized he wasn't breathing until the man pointed it out. The 4-year-old took in multiple gulps of air as the man coaxed him back to laying down, which he did. He couldn't disobey a hero. Why was a hero in his hospital room though? Why are you here? Izuku asked bluntly, grabbing his wing to play with his feathers. The heat had returned to them a while ago and he wasn't sure why it made him so uncomfortable. Burning. Crying. His mama, Papa. Rough hands grabbed his hand and Izuku realized that he'd tightened his grip on his feathers subconsciously. Why'd he do that? Where's his mama and Papa? I'm here because your quirk manifested. The man, Eraserhead, said. His what? My quirk? He questioned, confusion lacing his voice. He didn't have a quirk yet. He hadn't manifested it. His quirk, Hisashi, get help. His mama's voice called out. Izuku felt his eyes start to burn, his vision clouding over again as something wet leaked down his face. Tears. He's crying. Why's he crying? Izuku, calm down. It's okay. Her arms wrapped around him, holding him close. He could smell it, could feel it. No. 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 Please no. He felt pain blossom forth from his arms, sharp, grounding. Talons sank into flesh as he held himself like he'd crumble apart if he didn't. He was crumbling. He was burning. He couldn't breathe. He needed air. He needed his mama. K-C-A-D-W-B-R-T-H. Someone was talking, someone was pulling his hands away from his arms. He could feel something expanding and deflating, a gentle thudding on his fingertips. He followed the rhythm of the swelling. There we go. He was in the hospital again. Eraserhead was sitting on the bed with him, his hand was covering Izuku's on the pro-hero's chest where he could still feel the thumping of his heart. He was okay. It was just a horrible nightmare. He didn't hurt his mama and Papa, they were fine. Eraserhead would tell him where they are. Where's my mama and Papa? The boy watched the man's face fall. He'd seen that face before, Mama made it once when Grandpa stopped visiting. Would his mama and Papa not visit? No, they would. His mama and Papa loved him. He'd just have to wait for them to come. Kid, I'm sorry. Sorry? Sorry for what? His mama and Papa would be here soon, he knew it. Why wasn't he telling him where they were? They didn't make it. If they didn't make it here, then why wasn't Eraserhead going to get them? They just needed help getting here. We were too late, the fire, I'm so sorry. No. That was just a nightmare. His eyes were stinging again as he clutched onto his wings. His wings. Flames erupting from between his feathers, his mama crying in surprise, phone ringing, screaming, sirens. No. No. Yo, you're lying. He yelled, wings fluffing up defensively and swatting Eraserhead's outstretched hand away. Mama told me not to trust strangers. You're lying. Kid, Izuku swiped his hand out, talons extended and catching on the fabric of the man's sleeve. Get out. The 4-year-old snapped as his wings flared out behind him. He could feel embers liking at them, but he didn't care, he needed Eraserhead gone. Get out. The pro looked like he was about to protest when a calm voice spoke up from the doorway. Eraserhead, you are dismissed. The two already in the room whipped their heads around to stare at the newcomers. There was a woman at the front with ash blonde hair and turquoise eyes, a man to her left with medium-length beige hair, who looked in need of a good night's sleep, then another man with shaved black hair holding a briefcase. "Madam President." Eraserhead stood up and bowed to the woman. When he straightened out, he opened his mouth to speak, but the woman held her hand up to silence him. "You are dismissed." She stepped further into the room while the two men made more space for the pro to leave. The dark-haired man looked like he wanted to complain, glancing between Izuku and the people in suits before sighing in defeat and leaving. The woman, Madam President, fixed the green-haired boy with a smile that lacked any warmth. "Hello there, Midoriya Izuku." Izuku, whose wings immediately curled in on himself, muttered his own greeting as he hid his face behind the bright feathers before him. The boy watched through the plumage of his wings as the tired man closed the door and the other man placed the briefcase on the table by his bedside. "I'm Madam President," she introduced herself politely before gesturing to the man with beige hair. "This is Mara Yukumaru. She moved her hand towards the other man. "And Aoki Kaido." She brought her hand back towards her, placing it on her chest as she gave a short bow. "We're from the Hero Public Safety Commission." Izuku's eyes widened to the size of saucers as his wings withdrew from covering him. He sat up straighter, trying to look more serious, but the tremor in his wings gave away his excitement. The Hero Commission was here to see him. Him. Why, though? He tilted his head curiously, his face contorting in confusion. "Ah, yes, you're probably wondering why we're here." Madam President snapped her fingers and Aoki opened up the case, passing her a sheet of paper that was on top of a big stack of papers. "The simple answer is, we were curious about your quirk." She handed the paper to him and he could only stare at the words on it. The paper was filled with small text and words he didn't even know existed. He couldn't make heads or tails of the letters as they seemed to shift on the paper. The boy looked away from the weird document in his hands to the people in front of him, desperation obvious on his face. "Oh, my apologies, I forgot that you might not know how to read yet." The woman took the paper back, clearing her throat as she began to read. "The Hero Public Safety Commission has requested to take custody of one, Midoriya Izuku, for purposes of training the next generation of heroes. He will be housed in a secure location with the proper means to regulate and control his quirk. The HPSC will take responsibility for any medical, schooling, and material needs the child may need." Many of the woman's words flew right over the 4-year-old's head, but the ones he did retain made his wings shoot up in excitement. "You'll train me to be a hero?" he questioned enthusiastically, leaning forward with his hands firmly planted on his knees. "Yes, the commission is already taking on the training of another child, so adding you will help him grow as well." Madam President seemed to smile wider at his starstruck expression, snapping her fingers at Aoki again for another paper and a pen this time. She shook out said paper when it was in her hands and clicked the pen. "We need signed approval from you and then we'll be good to release you from here." "And then I can train?" He grabbed out for the pen which the woman gladly handed over to him alongside the contract. "We'd like to settle you in first before beginning any training," she explained, watching with eager eyes as Izuku scribbled a terrible signature on the paper. Aoki took it from him when he was done and nodded to Mara, who'd been silently watching everything. Mara retreated from the room shortly after while Madam President sat down carefully on the hospital bed. "Are you well enough to stand up?" He moved his legs around under the blankets and gave her a big nod. All his previous pain was forgotten in light of the new prospects. He was going to be a hero, but what about his mama and papa? Eraserhead said they were gone, but he'd obviously been lying. The Hero Commission wouldn't lie to him. "Mississippi. Will my mama and papa visit me?" Her expression turned sour at his question for just a second before it was replaced with the same pleasant smile she wore before. "Of course." Izuku grinned and that grin didn't waver even after they'd long since left the hospital room. Keigo lounged in his room, feet kicking from where they were dangling over the edge of the bed. He stared up at the ceiling blankly before groaning in boredom. Don't get him wrong, he was glad to not be training right now, but couldn't they have left him with something to do? He would honestly settle for one of those DMED puzzles, anything would be better than what he was doing now. Fed up with counting the ceiling tiles, the 11-year-old got up from the bed and began pacing the plain white room. He was almost tempted to just glide around the room but, looking at the cameras in the corners, decided against it. Was this another form of training? Lock him in a room and see how long he can last? Because that's what it was feeling like. He hadn't seen a single person today. The only sign that there were people even in the building was the food that had been pushed through from the slot in the door. Even then, he wasn't sure that was actually a human and not a robot. So where was everyone? His handler never stopped by for his training plan of the day. Madam President didn't debrief him on how he needed to improve, No dietitian showed up to tell him to stick to his meal plan and to not steal others' lunches. Nothing. This was definitely some form of training, either that or torture. Keigo was leaning more towards the latter because sitting here in deafening silence was driving him up the walls. He didn't know how long he'd been pacing the room when he heard the telltale signs of the door being unlocked. Finally, someone was here to retrieve him. He stood at attention before the door, waiting to see who would be greeting him and for the orders that would inevitably follow. No one entered for a moment, but Keigo could hear a hushed conversation. The voice, that he could easily recognize as Madam President, was speaking to a quieter voice, one that sounded younger. Way too young to be a new intern. Were they bringing on a new project? Cammy, please let it not be that. His heart instantly dropped when the door swung open, revealing a kid with bushy green hair and vibrant reddish-orange wings. The kid looked nervous, wings curled in on himself as he played with his fingers that were held close to his chest. They'd brought a new asset. A kid, a baby bird. He looked no older than 3. He was so small and those watery green eyes only added to the innocence. This place wasn't suitable for him. They'd ruin him. Keigo needed to get him out, but he couldn't speak. He was frozen. The kid seemed to brighten up significantly when he caught sight of the other boy, eyes zoning in on his wings. The green-haired boy looked up to Madam President with barely concealed excitement and Keigo's heart squeezed painfully at the bright smile. His expression must have shown his inner turmoil because the woman was glaring at him expectantly. They wanted him to make a good impression, to make this kid comfortable. He plastered on his best grin and held out his hand to the kid. Hiya, I'm Hawks or Takami Keigo, but you can just call me Keigo. The kid turned his attention back to the blonde and gripped his hand, shaking vigorously. Hi Keigo. I'm Midoriya Izuku. I love your wings. They're like mine. Keigo's eyes widened at the enthusiastic display, smile faltering slightly. This kid was too pure. He wasn't going to survive here. How could he get him out? Was it possible to get out? Before he could indulge that line of thinking anymore, he caught Madam President's eye. She was giving him a stern look, one that told him to keep up appearances or there'd be consequences. He quickly fixed the grin on his face, watching her nod in approval before she spoke up. Midoriya here will be staying with the HPSC to train to be a hero like you. Keigo's going to be a hero too? Will we train together? Midoriya asked, hopping from one foot to the other. The woman smiled down at him and nodded. That's so cool. I can't wait to start training. Well, you'll have to wait until tomorrow. Madam President waved a hand at the boy to calm down, which was ineffective as Midoriya was too far gone. She signed in defeat, stopping her attempts. Aoki will be by with your dinners. Her attention turned to the older boy. Hawks, explain the schedule to Midoriya. Yes, ma'am. Keigo gave a half-hearted salute, eyeing the baby bird with sympathy. He felt the HPSC president give him a glare before slamming the door closed, leaving the two winged children alone. Well, Midoriya, tell me about yourself. He prompted, stepping away from the door to approach the bed. You can call me Izuku since I'm calling you Keigo. Midoriya Izuku muttered as the blonde boy hopped up onto the bed and patted the space beside him. The other hesitated for a moment but relented and took a seat beside Keigo. I'm 4 years old, I like heroes? Who's your favorite? Keigo asked, letting himself fall back onto the bed. He winced when he landed weirdly on his wings and shifted to lay on his side, making sure to face Izuku. It was only when he turned around that he noticed how his question thrilled the other boy. All Might. The answer was stated without hesitation and Keigo laughed at the boy's joy. It'd be such a shame when it was gone. Why All Might? The older boy shifted once more on the bed so his feet were by the pillows and he was lying on his stomach with his head resting on his arms. He turned his face so he was still looking at Izuku, giving the boy all his attention. It was nice having company. All Might's so cool. He beats up bad guys and never loses and he does it all with a smile. I want to be just like him. It's a shame Izuku will never be like All Might, it wasn't what the commission wanted with them. But he wasn't going to tell the hatchling this. Let him keep that innocence. He is really cool. Keigo replied, absent-mindedly kicking his feet behind him as he spoke. I really like Endeavor. He noticed the slight falter in Izuku's grin and the fact that his enthusiasm was seemingly watered down. I don't like fire. His voice sounded so sad and the blonde had to think of something to distract him with. He scanned the room for ideas or topics to go off of, but this room was plain white with no art or any decor items. It was more like a prison cell than an actual room. The only things in it were a table, 2 chairs, a bed, and a bathroom. He really didn't want to get into the training details just yet, it would only bum him out. Izuku, though, seemed to have been excited about training. That mindset wouldn't last long here, but it was enough of a distraction for now. Keigo pulled himself into a sitting position, moving his wing to wrap around his new companion. The baby bird seemed to lean into the touch, likely deprived of any physical attention for who knows how long. Madam President wanted me to give you the layout of our schedule. She didn't specify if you'll have a different one, so I'll just tell you mine. Keigo made a show of reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded-up piece of paper. He could never actually keep up with his schedule if it wasn't on him. Don't tell her I carry this on me. He instructed Izuku, who just laughed at his little joke while he unfolded the paper. I won't tell anyone. The green-haired boy declared, unaware that the president was currently watching them through the camera. He'd get scolded for this later, but it's worth it to see the other boy laugh. We wake up at 6 a.m. for breakfast, then at 6:30 a.m., we head out for a meeting to discuss the day. 7 a.m. marks the start of general training, which includes flight and combat usually, and we train till 10 a.m. He glanced away from the paper to Izuku to make sure the 4-year-old was listening. Said boy was looking up at him with rapt attention, so he continued. At 10:15 a.m., we switch over to schoolwork, which we'll do until 3 p.m. Next we go in for Quirk training at 3:15 p.m. and end at 6 p.m. for dinner. Izuku seemed to be a little lost and Keigo couldn't blame him. It was a lot for a 4-year-old to take in. The times probably didn't make any sense to him, neither did the training now that he thought about it. Could a kid even comprehend training one's quirk? It's not like Izuku won't be able to keep up with the times when their handlers will take them everywhere. So much in one day. The hatchling gasped in awe, not sounding even remotely overwhelmed by it all. No wonder the commission sought him out if this is how he responded to a packed schedule. Falsely placed joy. He'd learn to regret that. And wow, if that didn't break Keigo to think about. This poor birdie. He vaguely wondered how people could be so cruel, then he remembered himself. Maybe that's why it made him so sad to think about. He saw himself in Izuku. He'll make sure the baby bird never feels alone like he had. They'll have each other from here on. Keigo? Izuku's voice cut through his thoughts and the older boy realized he'd been pulling the boy closer to him with his wing. Ah, sorry. He attempted to retract his wing, but a tiny hand stopped him while green eyes stared up into gold eyes. Izuku averted his gaze, playing with one of the blonde's feathers. Keigo smiled a little and released that feather to Izuku's horror. He tried to stifle a laugh, but one exploded from his mouth anyways. I'm so sorry. The green-haired boy apologized profusely, trying to put the feather back while the older boy cackled. Keigo grabbed Izuku's hand to halt his attempts, breathing deeply to calm himself. This was the most he'd laughed in a while. He hoped he'd have more moments like this. Izuku, it's okay. He soothed, making the feather soar from the little boy's hand and up into the air. It's my quirk, fierce wings. I can manipulate all the feathers on my wings. He explained, noticing how the baby bird grew more excited at the quirk explanation. That's so cool. Can you feel all your feathers even when they're far away? What happens when it gets hurt? Can you hear from them? How many can you move at a time? The boy kept muttering more and more questions at a speed Keigo couldn't keep up with. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder to stop his ramblings, which he did. How about one question at a time? Maybe I can even answer some of them when training tomorrow? He suggested, beaming when the other boy nodded vigorously. So that's how they spent the rest of the night until bed, Izuku asking questions with Keigo answering as best he could till they both fell asleep. And, for once, Keigo felt at peace. Izuku wasn't a morning person. That decision had been made up for him when a blaring alarm made him wake with a start. The 4-year-old whipped his head around every which way to take in his surroundings, taking a moment to remember where he was. He was at the Hero Public Safety Commission's office to become a hero with Keigo. Where was Keigo? The boy crawled out of bed to look for the older boy. He saw a door, that he never noticed before, at the far wall that was closed. Must be where the blonde had gone. A bathroom, maybe? The only way to find out was to knock, so he stepped up to the metal door and rapped his knuckles against it. Keigo and I? He wasn't sure why he used that nickname, but he didn't take it back. Keigo and him would be staying together, so why wouldn't Keigo be an older brother? They had the same wings. Izuku was startled from his thoughts by a crashing on the other side of the door, followed by a stream of words he's only ever heard from Auntie Mitsuki or Kaken. Keigo and I? Are you okay? He asked a little more nervously. I'm fine. I'm fine. The doorknob wiggled a little before creaking open a sliver so that Izuku could push it all the way if he wanted to. Which he did. The green-haired boy peeked in, seeing Keigo picking things up from off the floor. The blonde got up from his crouched position and placed the items he'd been holding onto the countertop by the sink. Accidentally hit these with my wing when I was turning around to dry my hands. Izuku turned his emerald gaze to take in the crumpled-up towel on the opposite wall across from the sink. He looked back towards Keigo, who was holding out a toothbrush to him. The little boy took it, holding it steady as Keigo squeezed some toothpaste on it. Are you done in here? Yep, I wake up a little earlier to get ready. He explained with a shrug, shimmying past Izuku to leave the room while the other boy reached up to the sink wet the toothbrush. I'll leave you be to get ready, alright? Handler stopped by to set out some clothes for you. I'll leave them on the bed. With that, Keigo retreated from the room and closed the door behind him. Izuku brushed his teeth while staring at the empty space beside him. His heart ached as he thought of the times his mama would stand next to him as they both got ready. Maybe he should wake up early too so he can get ready with Keigo? He spat out the toothpaste and searched for a cup to wash his mouth out with. There wasn't one. He cupped his hands under the tap, as best he could with his height, like he's seen his mama do, and drank from them instead. He came out of the bathroom after he was done, spotting the clothes that were left for him. They weren't anything special, just a black shirt with holes in the back for his wings and an equally black pair of shorts. There weren't any socks, but there were underwear, so he retreated back to the bathroom to put the clothes on. Keigo didn't say anything about him being shy about changing in front of him when the boy came back out again. All the blonde did was stand ramrod straight in front of the door, with his arms firmly planted to his sides. We stand like this until our handlers come to retrieve us. He explained when he glanced over to see Izuku's confused expression. He didn't really understand it, but did as the older boy told him to. The 4-year-old did his best to mimic the posture, his pose a little sloppier than Keigo's, but it was done, and in perfect time as the door clicked open. Izuku recognized Aoki from yesterday, but he wasn't alone. Beside Aoki was a tall man, like really tall, who had long ruby hair and sharp yellow eyes that made Izuku shrink in on himself involuntarily. Come along, the red-haired man said as he moved to the side to make room for the two children. The smaller boy followed behind Keigo, glancing at Aoki, who passed them to lead the way. He would have preferred to follow behind the tall man because then said man wouldn't be watching him with those sharp eyes. He could practically feel them boring into the back of his head. The little boy was so focused on the man walking behind him that he failed to notice that they'd reached their destination. The only thing that reminded him of his surroundings was the light shove Keigo gave him. He focused his eyes on Madam President, who was sitting neatly behind her desk with her hand set in front of her. Morning, you two. Morning, Madam President. Keigo replied back with a respectful bow that Izuku mimicked. He didn't want to mess up his first day, so he'd just follow Keigo's lead for today. Today we have you both scheduled for flight training. Hawks, you'll be training in the extreme weather simulator while Midoriya will be practicing basics. Izuku sent a curious glance at the older boy when the woman said extreme weather, but Keigo stood as if the words didn't bother him. So the green-haired boy moved his gaze from him back to the ash-blonde woman. Aoki, you're assigned to Hawks. Takato, you're in charge of Midoriya. Off you go. The red-haired man, Takato, reached down and took hold of Izuku's hand to begin guiding him away. The little boy resisted at first to share a look with Keigo. Said boy was smiling encouragingly at him as he was led away by Aoki, who had a hand resting on the blonde's shoulder. Midoriya. Takato's rough voice huffed out, pulling on his hand. Sorry. He apologized, scrambling forward to fall into step with the tall man, which was hard in and of itself with how short Izuku was. The green-haired boy had to speed up every now and then to keep up with the adult. While walking, Izuku took in the rooms they passed. Most looked like offices, but the further they got into the facility, the more the rooms began changing. One room was long and had pieces of paper with targets painted on them that were hanging on the far wall, with weapons displayed on the unoccupied walls. Another room had padded walls that were adorned with multiple slashes marks. Then the one they were heading towards, it had a tall ceiling and was pure white save for the floor that was concrete. Takato released his hand, directing him to the center of the room with a wave of his hand. Izuku stretched his wings out while he watched the man type on his watch. Then the white walls shifted to a bright blue with clouds scattered about. They seemed to rotate around the room like they were a panning image, which they probably were. When Izuku managed to look away from the simulated sky, Takato was standing in front of him, which made the little boy step back in surprise. The tall man didn't draw attention to it, too busy typing on his watch again. Can you fly? He nodded, so Takato continued. What's your wingspan? I don't know. The toddler spoke shyly as the man circled around him so that he was now behind Izuku. The boy tried not to flinch as Takato held the tip of one of his feathers and pulled on it so that his wing was extended. He wanted to pull his wing back towards him with how uncomfortable he was feeling, but he thought better of it. The man was doing it for a reason. That reason was clear when he heard Takato muttering into his watch. Long and narrow wingspan, high aspect ratio, perfect for high-speed flights and diving. The man paused, gliding his fingers along the tips of his feathers. Low aspect ratio characteristics, slight wing slots for better maneuverability. He felt the man's eyes glance between Izuku and his wing before continuing with his analysis. High body weight to wing size, high wing loading, faster flight at the cost of energy used to keep airborne. Focus on endurance and stamina training. Izuku didn't understand a word of what Takato was saying, shifting from foot to foot until the man released his wing and he could pull it back towards himself. The redhead didn't address him yet, as he uttered something about looking into falcons for better training plans. Only then did he actually face the child he's supposed to teach. I doubt you understood anything I said, so I'll dumb it down for you. He frowned at the wording. Mama said he was smart, so Takato's just being a meanie. Izuku decides he doesn't like Takato. You can fly very fast, but it takes a lot of energy for you to stay up, right? The green-haired child nodded, so the man continued. That means we're going to train to make sure you can stay up longer. So start flying. Izuku complied, spreading his wings out and crouching down before launching himself a few inches off the ground to begin flapping his wings. Takato made a sound of disappointment at the sloppy takeoff but allowed the boy to stay airborne. The toddler huffed as he tried to keep himself in the air like Takato told him to, but he was getting really tired and his feet were beginning to touch the ground. Stay up? The man demanded, and Izuku startled, flapping his wings more desperately to stop himself from falling to the floor. Try not to fly in place. I want to see how capable you are. Glide, dive, do anything to stay in the air. Izuku pushed himself further off the ground so he could fly better. Staying in place was hard, he could fly. He's done it before with Kaken. Though, back then he didn't have enough space to, but this room was pretty big, so he decided to test out how quickly he could get from where to was to the other side of the room. Takato didn't stop him as he flew off as fast as he could towards that wall. It felt so freeing to be like this, the wind on his cheeks from how fast he's going. Oh wait, he might be going too fast. The wall was getting dangerously close, but he didn't know how to slow down. Takato said he had maneuverability. Maybe that means he can stop himself? The boy shifted his wing position and startled as he turned sharply right into a different wall. The impact hurt, really hurt, but Takato was already groaning in disappointment and he didn't want to disappoint anyone. What if they took him back to the hospital? Or they said he wasn't worthy of being a hero? No, he had to stay up. So, Izuku kicked off the wall to experiment with turning in the air. He face-planted into many things during his attempts, but he felt he was getting the hang of things and he wasn't flying into things as much anymore. He'd managed to do 3 whole laps before Takato called for him to land. Though landing was an entirely different challenge altogether. He ended up curling his wings into an M shape and plummeting towards the ground faster than he intended to. The boy only managed to catch himself from hitting the ground because Takato yelled out for him to spread his wings out again, which allowed him to land unharmed. Decent work, we'll hopefully be able to pick this up tomorrow. Why hopefully? Izuku questioned, rubbing underneath his nose where it had been bleeding. The blood was dry now, so it just flaked away. Madam President might decide a different plan for tomorrow. Takato explained, looking down at his watch briefly. After a moment, he held out his hand for Izuku to take and started leading him down the hallways again when he did. Izuku expected to be led back to a room with Keigo, but instead he was deposited into a room with a table and 2 chairs facing a TV. On the desk was a weird device, a notebook, and a few pens. The red-haired man led him towards the table, releasing his hand to help him into a chair before sitting beside him. What are we doing? You're too young to begin regular schooling, so Madam President suggested we analyze some news footage since you seemed rather interested in it yesterday. Izuku tilted his head in confusion and Takato let out a long sigh. She wants you to talk about quirks. The little boy's face split into a bright smile. I can? You won't stop me? Takato nodded, making Izuku rock back and forth in anticipation for when the TV would be turned on. But the man didn't turn the TV on, at least, not yet. He instead reached for the weird device and pressed a button on the top of it. This is Takato Mamoru with Midoriya Izuku beginning analysis lesson 1. He spoke before taking the TV remote in hand and turning it on to the new channel. Analyzing Pro Hero, best genist in his fight against 3 knife-quirked bank robbers. Begin. And Izuku began talking. Izuku didn't expect to have so much to say about best genist in one fight, but here he was, 5 hours later with the meanest sore throat he's ever had. It felt as if he'd swallowed a cheese grater then ate Auntie Mitsuki's cooking. At least Takato wasn't as bad as he thought previously, because the man had offered him a big glass of water when they finished. So now the little boy was feeling less crappy as they walked the winding halls of the Hero Commission's building once more. He didn't even try to peek into the other rooms this time because he was just so tired after flying and analyzing, and, God, he's going to have to do this again tomorrow. How does Keigo do this? Izuku just wanted to go to bed already. Takato must have heard his wishes for his bed because he completely disregarded them and nudged him into another white room. The toddler whined in displeasure, tears beginning to burn in his eyes as he stomped his foot while pouting. "Why can't I go to bed?" The redhead groaned and just kept pushing Izuku further into the room, despite the boy's protests. Takato seemed to be trying to ignore the little boy's tantrum because he wasn't saying a word, until he suddenly exploded. "You're training to be a hero. You've studied heroes, so you should know they do things they don't want to be stronger, right? Be a hero and get over it." Izuku sniffled in surprise, eyes wide and still filled with tears. He shuffled away from the adult, fingers fidgeting nervously as he watched the man take deep breaths to calm himself. He didn't apologize for yelling like Mama or Papa would. He didn't even acknowledge the outburst. He just moved on. "We're doing Quirk training now," the man began, rolling his eyes as he watched Izuku wipe his nose of the snot. "Heroes don't cry, Midoriya," he scolded. "We need a strong hero and you're not being very strong right now. Don't you want to be strong? To be a hero?" "Yes. I want to be strong," Izuku replied quickly, lowering his hands away from his face and forcing himself to stand tall. "I want to be a hero." Takato smiled. A smile that made the winged boy shudder. A smile that was only teeth, ready to snap at any moment. Izuku never wants to see that smile again. "Then let's begin." The Hero Commission agent tapped something on his watch that made the room shift and, what was once solid white walls, became a shiny silver surface. Izuku eyed it questioningly, but he wasn't given the chance to respond as the tall man continued. "Ignite your flames." "Am I flames?" He didn't have fire. He'd already told Eraserhead that. Didn't these people know that? "Yes, you're flames. Who else here has a fire quirk?" Takato sighed in exasperation, rolling his eyes so hard Izuku worried they'd get stuck in his head. "I don't have a fire quirk," he insisted meekly, shrinking in on himself at the murderous glare the redhead fixed him with. "You do." The man took a dangerous step towards him, reaching a hand out and grabbing hold of the little boy's wings. Izuku gripped his own wing to try and pry it out of the iron grip the man had on him. He was crying now as he fought against the adult. "Stop being difficult and activate your quirk." "I can't." Izuku sobbed desperately, still fighting to free himself. Then, it happened, flames burst to life, erupting out from his wings in an explosion of light and heat. Takato screamed and released him, the smell of his flesh burning hit Izuku like a truck, as did the memories. His mother's skin sliding off her face, bones peeking out from the spots burnt away by the fire eating at her. Izuku scrambled away from the fire, panicking as it followed him. It was on him. He was burning. He slapped the embers free flowing from his back like a tidal wave, hopelessly trying to stop them. But they weren't stopping. They kept coming. He could feel it. It was destroying him. And suddenly, it was gone and the little boy was left gasping for air as he tried to reorientate himself. He spotted Takato getting led out of the room by two men he didn't recognize while Mera was standing by the door, watching the group leave. Izuku nearly jumped when he noticed Madam President's presence beside him. Any trace of kindness she had was gone, leaving only harsh disappointment in its wake. "You panicked over your own fire. It wasn't even hurting you and you panicked," she stated with a disapproving shake of her head. "We need to up your tolerance. Fire isn't something to fear, it's your greatest tool. But it hurts people." Izuku mumbled, looking away from her ridiculing gaze. "All quirks can hurt people, it just happens to be that your quirk hurts more people." He recoiled at that wording, eyes welling with tears, but he wouldn't dare let them fall. "Which is why we need you." "Why you want me to hurt people?" Izuku asked, not understanding. "Heroes help, not hurt. Why would the ones who make heroes want him to hurt people? Heroes hurt villains all the time and they do it for good reason," she explained, briefly glancing over her shoulder at where Takato had exited. "You hurt Takato because he was hurting you. Were you not justified? Was he not acting like a villain?" Izuku's eyes widened in realization. Takato was acting like a meanie and heroes take down meanies. But, did he have to use fire to take down the villains? Do I need to use fire?" Madam President let out a deep sigh, rising to her full height and looking down at the little boy. "Fire is your tool," she replied simply, turning away from him. "We'll get you to use it sooner or later." The woman snapped at Mera, who jumped from where he'd been dozing off. Mera went over to Izuku and held a hand out for the boy to take. Izuku, who was still reeling from the interaction with Takato, elected to stand up on his own and follow the tired man at a distance. Mera led him back to the room he shared with Keigo, opening it and letting the green-haired child run to safety. "We'll be back." A yawn cut through Mera's sentence, but he continued like it never happened. "Your dinner." Then he left, locking the door behind him. Izuku didn't notice this, though, too busy trying to bury himself in the scratchy blankets adorning the bed. He didn't even care that they scraped against his skin uncomfortably, he just needed safety, and the smell of the first nice person he'd met here was safety. He found comfort in the little feathers Keigo had shed. The sound of the door opening once more broke through his tranquil haze, and his entire body tensed until it closed again. Then Keigo's voice called out, and Izuku was hurling himself at the blonde, clinging to him like his life depended on it. Keigo and I. Whoa! He felt Keigo shift slightly as he tried to get a better hold of the little boy. What's going on, hatchling? Izuku didn't reply, just burying his face deeper into the older boy's tattered shirt. Was it always tattered? Had they done worse to Keigo? Was he hurt? The green-haired boy pulled away to take in Keigo's appearance. The blonde's shirt was incredibly dirty, but that was nothing compared to his face. It looked like he'd been dragged behind a car or run over by one. Izuku grimaced at the disheveled boy. What happened, Keigo and I? Training. Keigo shrugged and, before the younger boy could prod further, shot the question back at him. What happened to you? Training. Izuku responded distantly, trying to force the memories of burning flesh from his mind. He was so tired. I want to go to bed. It'll get better. The older boy tried, but Izuku wasn't so sure. If Keigo came back looking like that, then what would happen to him? He doesn't want to think about that right now. Or ever. Keigo noticed his silence and sighed. Let's get you to bed then. Keigo sat Izuku at the edge of the bed as he made a nest with the blankets and pillows. Finally laying the half-conscious boy to bed, where he immediately fell into a fire-filled nightmare. Any hope Izuku had for a better day was quickly dashed when he arrived in the room he'd be training in. It looked the same, but one press of a button proved that was not the case because it had begun snowing. His new handler, Saito, a scrawny-looking woman with pale blue hair and razor-sharp teeth, just pushed him into the room and commanded him to fly. I can't fly in the snow. Izuku tried to protest, but Saito just waved her hand dismissively. Figure it out. Was all she said. So he tried to figure it out. He tried to take off to no avail, the snow accumulating on his wings and dragging him down. The boy attempted to shake it off, but more snow just replaced it. He gave up his attempts at that method pretty fast. His third idea was to just power through it, again, to no avail. Saito seemed to be fed up with his sad attempts because she spoke up when he tried to take off for the 5th time. Use your fire to melt the snow off your wings. But wouldn't the snow put it out? He attempted to reason, to find any excuse to not go through what he did yesterday. Not if you produce enough heat. Saito replied, tone clipped. You're wasting precious training time. Alright, sorry. Izuku tried not to shake as he reached for the warm feeling in his back. It took every fiber of his being not to swat the flames away when they flickered to life. He was trembling by the time he'd gotten a big enough flame to keep the snow from weighing him down. The only downside now was the fact that he was paralyzed in place, too busy trying to fend off the memories to move. The roaring of fire accompanied by the deafening screams from his mama and papa threatened to invade his mind. But a glance up at Saito halted its approach, and he remembered what had happened with Takato. The phantom pains from being held by his wing was enough to spur him into motion. He took to the sky like he'd done yesterday, though today was more of a struggle keeping airborne. The fact was that he had to keep the flames up, which took concentration, but he was distracted with the memories he's forcing back. So, all around, not an easy thing for the 4-year-old to do. All Izuku was managing to do was fly in place a few inches off the ground, which was better than he'd done before. Saito didn't seem as pleased with his progress as he was, though, since she started throwing things at him. The little boy yelped in surprise when the first object made contact with his shoulder, and he just barely dodged the second by flying to the side. Her barrage of items didn't stop just because he dodged once, no, they kept coming. He didn't even know how she was getting all these objects. Was it her quirk? He wasn't even allowed to pay much attention to that thought as a ball collided with his kneecap. Izuku cried out in pain, finally falling to the ground from where he had been 4 feet in the air. He cradled his knee while he cried, but Saito didn't pay him any mind as she typed away on a tablet. Good, you managed to keep your flames active that entire time. She complimented, at last turning to face the crying boy. It was just a rubber ball, you're fine. The woman hauled him to his feet as he winced in discomfort, sniffling to stifle the tears. Now we aren't doing analysis today, follow me. The green-haired boy limped behind the pale woman, rubbing snot from his face as they walked. There was no point in taking in his surroundings anymore. He knew they'd just be training rooms or offices, but he was forced to look up when he realized they'd walked into a kitchen. Was she going to teach him to cook? He didn't know he needed to learn how to cook to be a hero. Well, it would make sense for his future and living alone. But couldn't it wait? He was only little. Mama had told him not to be in the kitchen with him when she was cooking. Did the commission not know it wasn't safe for him there? His worries about cooking were swiftly forgotten when the woman opened the door to a giant freezer. Izuku didn't understand what she wanted from the freezer or why she'd take him with her into the freezer, but here he was following her in. He studied the space curiously, but there wasn't much to see as it was empty. Before he could ask Saito why the freezer was empty, the door slammed shut and Izuku whipped around to see that the woman had left him. He rushed to the door, but he couldn't reach the handle to open it. Izuku hugged himself as he shivered, looking wildly around to see if there was another exit. There wasn't. He wanted to cry. He wanted to cry so badly, but the coolness of the freezer kept them at bay. The little boy wrapped his wings around himself for some warmth, but that left his back open to the elements. Izuku really didn't want to do it. However, he knew he had to. It was becoming easier to summon it and easier to ignore the screaming in his brain telling him to extinguish it. He settled himself on the floor, wings still curled and so the flames were closer to him. Izuku had to keep his eyes shut so the sight of them so close to him wouldn't make him put them out. He'd just be cold again if he did that. He'd just have to tough it out until someone came for him. So he waited. And waited. And waited. No one came for a long time. He'd gotten used to the embers by the time the door creaked open once more and there Saito was, typing on her tablet like before. He didn't mind it though. He could only focus on the light behind her, but he wouldn't dare move towards it without orders. "Well done," she said, motioning him to stand. Izuku struggled to his feet, almost slipping on the wet floor. Wet? Shouldn't it be ice? Oh right, the fire. He let the flames fade from his wings as he approached her. "We have one more exercise today, then you can have dinner." Izuku nodded, following her once more down the halls to the next nightmare. Izuku wasn't sure what he was walking into when Saito opened the door. A study of the room only confused him further. It looked the same as any other room he'd been taken to while in this place, but this time, there was someone tied to a chair. The person had dirty blonde hair and that was the only defining feature Izuku could see as his eyes were covered. The little boy turned his head to look up at his handler. She didn't give any indication that she was paying attention to him. He took a tentative step forward, walking a wide circle around the person who whipped their heads around as if following his movements. "Who the hell's there?" Izuku jumped back at the sudden scream, letting out an involuntary yelp as he scrambled to get further away from the man. That was definitely a man's voice and the gruffness of it only set the 4-year-old on edge. Big green eyes flashed towards dark blue eyes as Izuku pleaded for some sort of direction from the woman who led him here. Saito didn't divulge any information, instead retreating from the room and leaving him alone with the stranger. He made sure to stay far away from the blonde man as he became more and more agitated. The man was screaming to be let go, that he'd kill whoever dared to tie him up, or offering to pay for his freedom. It was all so confusing for the little boy. Why had the Hero Commission brought him here of all places? Who was this man? Why was he tied up? A crackling sound snapped him back to reality and the boy looked around for the source of the noise. He froze when Madam President's voice sounded throughout the room. "Don't bother looking around, Pheonix." Pheonix? Who was she talking about? "Oh, right, we haven't told you your codename yet. Midoriya, you are Pheonix." Izuku thought about that for a moment. He supposed it made sense. Every hero needs a name and Keigo goes by Hawks, so it's only right that he has one. Pheonix is a cool hero name. Now on to the reason why you're here. Madam President continued while the little boy watched the tied-up man as he struggled. He wanted to help but hesitated at her next words. "Meet Kamitani Yoru, he was caught after he murdered 3 families in Kyoto. He was in the process of killing a 4th when captured." Izuku took a step back from the man, holding his hands close to himself as he stared straight at the killer. He didn't dare take his eyes off Kamitani again. Even though he was tied up, Izuku didn't trust the man not to jump out at him. Though this information didn't tell him why he specifically was here, just why Kamitani was here. It's the Hero Commission's job to clean the filth from this world, so Izuku didn't like where this was going. "We need you to eliminate him." He really didn't like this. The boy looked desperately around for a way out, a way where he wouldn't need to kill someone. "I can't," he cried out when there wasn't one visible. His eyes landed back on the man he was just instructed to kill, the same man who was now begging to be spared. I can't. Villains like him deserve punishment, do they not?" Madam President prompted, to which Izuku furiously shook his head no to. "No?" He nodded, hearing a disappointed tooting from the intercom. "Well, did your parents deserve punishment then?" "Huh?" He risked a glance away from the villain, only to be met with a projection of an all-too-familiar scene. Izuku stumbled back, falling onto his butt as he stared wide-eyed at the image before him. It was a crime scene photo, but not just any crime scene photo. He recognized the interior. No matter how charred it was, he could never forget the days he'd run around in his all. Might onesie with his papa chasing him. He could never forget sitting at the table with his drawings while mama cooked katsudon. Except, in the images, there were no happy memories littering the halls. There were only two bodies, barely recognizable but very familiar. His papa and mama. He remembers his birthday. How happy he was to get an All Might figure. Then heat, so much heat. A heat that he'd grown familiar with in his time in the freezer. His fire. His fire burning his mama and papa. You had no qualms about killing your parents. A distant voice spoke. When did everything become so distant? Why was his head ringing? They deserved to die but not this villain? He couldn't breathe. Couldn't get rid of the buzzing in his ears. Couldn't stop the energy burning just below the surface. He couldn't stop it when it burst out of him. Then everything became incredibly sharp. He could see the flames liking around him, creeping closer towards the man tied to the chair, could hear his screams as the inferno finally reached, could smell his flesh as the fire ate away at it. No. No. Not again. He thought desperately, trying to push the blaze back, to make it stop. But the damage was already done. What's left of Kamitani lay motionless on the floor, not yet charred as his parents were, but gone nonetheless. Izuku let out a choked noise, backing up as far as he could while covering his mouth and nose. Tears spilled from his eyes like waterfalls as he watched the unmoving form as if hoping it would move again. But it didn't. It lay there unchanged as the door eases open. Everything happens in a blur. He's removed from the room just as Kamitani is tucked into a bag. He doesn't know what happens to the man after that, Saito doesn't tell him. She leaves him in his shared room with only the memories to keep him company. The little boy cries a lot in the time between her leaving and Keigo returning. Keigo doesn't say anything to him, just holds him. And that's all Izuku needs at the moment. Waking up the next day, Izuku thought it would all be different, that he'd feel different, but it wasn't and he didn't. He felt the same as he did yesterday and the new morning routine didn't change. Keigo still woke up before him and offered the bathroom to him after he was done. He got changed and was led out of the room no sooner afterwards. Madam President did her speech on the plan for today just as she'd done the day before. Though he had the cruel reminder of what they made him do in the name he'd been dubbed, Pheonix. Izuku supposed it was fitting given the wings and the fire, but it felt like a horrible weight had been thrown on him when the woman addressed him by it. He wondered if Keigo had to do what he's done. Did they make him hurt people too? Probably. Madam President had said that heroes hurt people and they were making Keigo a hero too. But did they make Keigo kill? He didn't want to ask that. The 4-year-old was pulled from his thoughts as Saito opened the door to the flight room. He didn't need prompting to know to start flying, and he didn't need it to start up those horrible flames again when she made it snow. The snow was worse this time, but the heat from his fire kept it from accumulating. The only trouble he was having was flying around the room, and that was just visibility. He couldn't see where he was flying and ended up slamming into the wall a fair share of times before he got the hang of it. Then came analysis practice. The subject of today being Endeavor. Izuku didn't much like the hero, he was just as mean to reporters and civilians as he was to villains. Endeavor didn't care about damages to surroundings, scorching anything that got too close. Is that the kind of hero they want him to become? He didn't want to think about that but couldn't stop his mind from dwelling as he watched Endeavor blast a villain with a jet of fire. Izuku wanted to flinch every time the man used his flames, mind flashing to Kamitani whenever he did. He wasn't even sure if he was saying anything useful, letting himself just ramble about what he was seeing and not thinking. Lunch came and went, Izuku spent it eating in the freezer. Saito had handed him a frozen block of something, telling him he had to heat it up himself if he wanted to eat. So he'd started up the fire, warming himself and cooking his lunch. He was let out shortly after he'd finished eating. Then it was time for Quirk training. The sight that met him in the room Saito led him to was an exact copy of what had greeted him yesterday. Though, this time, there was a woman tied to the chair. The woman had pretty pink hair held tightly in a bun at the back of her head, goat-like horns protruding from her forehead with ears to match. He so badly wanted to ask her about her quirk but, given the circumstances, thought better of it. A familiar crackling sound signaled Izuku to the presence of Madam President. The little boy did his best to straighten out to look proud, but his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't help the way his eyes glazed over with unshed tears, because he knew what they'd ask of him and he couldn't stop it. This is Itoyume-sana. Izuku didn't want to know her name, it made it harder because now he'll have 2 names to put to the people he's had to kill. Is that why they gave names? To make him feel awful? To make him feel like a monster? She was caught after robbing a bank and holding the people inside hostage. Madam President droned on as if she was uninterested. Don't you think she deserves punishment, Pheonix? There it was. He tried to remain calm, to not fall apart, but he couldn't help the tremor that took hold of his body or the way his feet froze him in place. He didn't want to do it again. The smell of smoke and burning flesh had yet to leave his nostrils. He couldn't go through that again. I said, don't you think she deserves punishment? The stern voice of Madam President spurred him into action. He already knew how bad training was, he couldn't imagine what an actual punishment would be like. So he lit his wings up, flapping them to spread the flames throughout the room. He flinched back when the screams began, eyes squeezing shut against the smoke and tears that evaporated before they could fall. He did his best to tune out the cries for help, the desperate shouts to make it stop. He kept his eyes closed through it all, even after it went silent. It was suffocating, both the smoke in his lungs and the quiet. The silence was worse than the screaming because it meant that the one crying was dead and he was the cause. He'd caused the screaming and the emptiness it left when it was over. It was his fault. He was a monster. They made him a monster. He was just about to open them when he felt something grip his leg and they snapped open anyways. Terrified, Izuku looked down to see the woman holding onto his pant leg and foot. Half her face still had flames liking at it, her mouth was open in a silent scream and he swore he could see through her cheek. He wanted to back away but he found his body wouldn't move as her hands slackened. He saw the light in her pink eyes fade as she let out a final gasp, falling limp before him. Izuku was stuck staring at her empty expression until the door behind him swung open. He recognized Aoki as he peeled the woman off him, some of her skin remaining on his clothes with the action. A hand fell onto his shoulder and the boy looked up, expecting to see Saito, but was met with Madam President smiling at him. He turned his gaze away from her to the person that was once sharing the room with him. You did a good job. She praised while he was fixated on the commission agent stowing Itoyume into a bag. It wasn't right. Heroes don't do this. Heroes don't kill. He mumbled out loud, head lowering so he could look at his feet. Madam President hummed non-committally before saying something that made Izuku's heart drop. We aren't making you a hero. What? The tears that were building finally began to fall as he stared up at her with big green eyes. But you said? We needed someone on the inside. Do your job right and you'll save so many people. The woman knelt down to be at eye level with him. She was fixing him with such a serious look that it made the 4-year-old shrink back on reflex. Can we count on you to do a good job? Izuku let his gaze wander to the bag, where Itoyume now rest, being carried away by Aoki and another man. He knew, even in his 4th-year-old brain, that if he didn't do a good job then the commission had no problem setting him straight. He faced back to Madam President and nodded, forcing every ounce of confidence he had into his expression to mask the fear. I'll do my best. He creaked out. Good. Training became all Izuku knew for the next 5 years. He'd wake up, train, eat, train some more, and sleep. That was his life until blocking attacks and projectiles became second nature to him. He no longer spiraled when igniting his flames, it became as easy as breathing. Though he still couldn't rid his mind of the images that plagued it. Whenever he set a criminal alight, memories of his parents' corpses bubbled to the surface and he'd need to curl into Keigo for comfort as he cried. That's how he'd fall asleep every night and his dreams would turn to nightmares as the images persist throughout. He couldn't recall the names of all the villains anymore, there were too many to count. He could hardly remember a life outside of the commission, just flashes of blonde hair and faces long since lost to time. The only exposure to the outside world he had was Quirk analysis training where they'd show him news footage but those lessons became scarce as he became proficient in analysis. So he was closed off to the world once again though Keigo, who was out in the world doing work studies with heroes, told him many stories about how everything was. But then again, those stories only included the bad as did the news footage. He was beginning to wonder if that's all life had to offer, only wickedness and cruelty. The never-ending training and killing turned his worldview sour till he was only seeing the worst in everything. Gone was the little kid with dreams of being a hero. Izuku knew better now, he was a means to an end, the commission's way into the underground. He wouldn't be like Keigo, he was worse than Keigo because while Hawks was off saving people, Izuku was killing the criminals he caught. Perhaps that was why he withdrew from Keigo in the months leading up to his 9th birthday, jealousy. He still cared for Keigo, still sought him out on hard days, but he began drifting from him. He wanted what Keigo had. Resentment found its place in his heart, for the commission and Keigo, and he hated it. He didn't want to resent Keigo. Keigo was the closest thing to family he had now, but it didn't stop the feelings from sticking. It was harder sharing a room with the other boy now, but harder still was the new training regimen. Since he'd become proficient in combat and analysis, they'd moved him to different types of training. The commission now had him learning stealth, tracking, and resource gathering. Which was all well and good if it wasn't for what they had him gathering intel on. The intel the commission wanted was on every hero who has ever done something criminal. They gave him free rein to their records and it was scary how many heroes were just as bad as villains. This would be worrying in and of itself, but then they throw in lessons about leaving no traces behind when leaving a room, and Izuku starts getting a bad feeling. This feeling only gets stronger as he's faced with something he could never expect from the commission. It had started out as any other day would. He got up, got dressed, started stealth training, then information gathering, and lunch. A standard day. It took a turn when he was supposed to have his tracking lesson. He still didn't understand why he needed to know how to track, but he digressed. Instead of heading towards the regular room, Saito turned down an all too familiar hallway, the one that led to a room where many people met their end. They were doing this again. He was back to ridding the trash from the world, as Saito so eloquently put it back when he was 6. Suppose that all good things come to an end. He mused internally as they stopped before the door to his personal hell, or would it be the person tied to the chair's hell? They could share. Saito unlocked the door and held it open for Izuku, who took his time walking in to prolong the inevitable. He did it every time without fail, dragging his feet quite literally. The green-haired boy took in the room like it was the first time he was in there, again something he did to prolong the process, as he walked. His steps screeched to a halt when he finally went to look at the occupant in the chair. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief because there was no way the pro-hero, Gitter, was in the room tied to the chair, no way. But upon removing his hands, he saw it clear as day, lavender hair that sparkled in the light, the pink and purple jumpsuit with her goggles still fixed on her head. It was her. He whipped around to plead with Saito for it to be fake, but the woman was already gone and the crackling for the speakers sounded. This was real. They were going to make him kill a hero. Sure, she wasn't the best hero, her civilian injury ratio is higher than her save ratio, and she had a shady past with drag use, and there were the many accounts of harassment from fans, and alright, she's terrible, but still he can't kill a hero. I'm sure you understand why you're here, Pheonix. Madam President spoke, and, yes, unfortunately he did know why he was here. Though he could use more of an explanation, and it seemed the Hero Commission president was in a talking mood because she explained. We plan to make you a villain to join the underground, but you've only targeted villains. That won't get you in the underground. But if you kill a hero, you'll become a symbol like Stain. Though we can't have you killing any good hero, so here you are. He turned away from the speaker with a heavy sigh as he stared ahead at Glitter. Glitter was turning her head around every which way to locate the source, like that would do her any good since she's blindfolded. They all do the same things when they're in that chair, scream and look around. Now that he thought about it, why wasn't she screaming? A closer inspection showed that she was gagged too. Small blessing. He was horrible for thinking that, but, after so many screams, he'll take the silence. He knew what they'd wanted next. He hated how easy it was for him to flare his wings out and spark the flames to life. Despised how he directed the fire towards her by pressing the tips of his wings together so easily, like he wasn't snuffing out a life. Then the smell hit him and he was back to being a kid again. He was right back to his 4th birthday, cradling his mother's dead body while his father ran for help. Though he was better at pushing those thoughts away now, and he was about to keep his face neutral. Only a few seconds later and the door behind him opened. All the familiar faces rushed in to take care of the body while Madam President settled to stand beside him. She held out a file, but, when he went to take it, she slapped his hand. We'll be planting this with her body. It's your calling card, your signature, which means you can't get your fingerprints on it. We've been teaching you to compile files like this for all your targets. She opened the file with her gloved hands to a page of Glitter's recorded drag use. It includes a record of all the target's crimes and grievances. The woman slapped it closed and passed it off to Aoki as he left with the body bag. You want me to kill more heroes? He asked, already knowing the answer. Of course they'd want him to kill more heroes, why wouldn't they? Just let him take out the undesirable heroes to keep their good image. Only the ones we tell you to. Now run along to bed. You've had a busy day. He wanted to roll his eyes but resolved to just follow Saito back to his and Keigo's room. Hopefully the press gives the commission hell for this. It had been a rough night for Shota. He got stabbed halfway through his patrol while taking down a mugger, which would have SCKED on its own, but then he had to chase down a guy who robbed a convenience store while bleeding from his arm. That takedown took 2 whole hours because the guy had a quirk that let him camouflage into his surroundings. Turning in that criminal and getting checked on by a paramedic delayed his arrival home, but he was so relieved when his head finally hit the pillow. He got 5 heavenly minutes of rest before his phone vibrated with an incoming call. He groaned, rising to a sitting position and plucking his phone off the nightstand. Caller ID, Tsukachi. He practically growled at the name on his screen before accepting the call. He'd normally be worried about waking Hisashi with a phone call at 4 a.m., but his husband was already up, so he didn't bother lowering his voice when he spoke. What is it? You know I just got to bed, right? Of course, and I apologize for interrupting. Shota doubted he was apologetic or he wouldn't have called at all. Tsukachi must have heard his thoughts because he tacked on. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't an emergency. All right, tell me what it is. He got out of the comfort of his bed and trudged over to where he threw his hero costume. It sounded like Tsukachi was shifting some papers about, so he took the time to set his phone down and put it on speaker so he could get dressed without his phone being in the way. He was just fastening his utility belt into place when the detective finally spoke again. Sorry about that, the station's been very busy today with what happened last night. Shota picked his phone back up once the belt was secured, turning it off speaker to hold it up to his ear. What happened last night? It'd be easier to explain in person. Of course it would. Why wouldn't the detective ask him in ad? He checked the time on his phone, 5 a.m. in the morning. I'll be there soon. He hung up without giving Tsukachi the chance to reply. The dark-haired man stepped out of the bedroom and was immediately hit with the smell of bacon and the sound of Hisashi humming along to the radio. A quick trip down the hallways and Shota could see his husband standing in front of the stove dancing to the music while he cooked. He cleared his throat to announce his presence, making the blonde man jump in surprise and drop the spatula. Green Eyes found him and Hisashi's side while clutching his chest. Jesus, babe, you can't be sneaking up on me like that. He complained, leaning down to retrieve the dropped utensil. I thought you were asleep. Detective Tsukachi needs me at the station. Shota explained, watching his husband throw the spatula that fell into the sink and grab a new one. He rounded the kitchen island to hug the other man from behind, resting his chin in the crook of Hisashi's neck. Said it was important, so I won't be able to have breakfast with you. Well, that's all right, the blonde reassured. I'll make sure to set some aside for you. Now Shu, you have work to do. Hisashi raised the hand not holding the spatula and flicked Shota on the forehead. He groaned in protest, kissing his husband's neck while Hisashi waved his hand at him. Love you. Love you too. Now go, I need to take the bacon off the stove. Shota released him with one final peck to his cheek and left the kitchen to head to the entryway. The pro hero pulled on his shoes and grabbed his capture scarf. He placed the garment on, then plucked his keys off the hook and departed for the Mizurufu police station. Arriving at the police station, Shota could see why Tsukachi had been so eager for his help. The station was the most alive he'd ever seen it, officers running about with evidence boxes and papers. He could see Officer Sansa flipping between directing his coworkers with criminals to cells and answering the phone. The cat-headed officer covered the receiver with his hand and moved it away from his mouth when he saw the pro approaching him. Tsukachi is in conference room 1. He stated shortly before turning back to the phone. No, we don't have any new information. The catman muttered into it while directing another officer with a hand motion. He took that as his cue to leave, rounding the desk to the hallway on the right. He's been in the station enough times to know the layout by heart, but he'd only ever been to the cells or Tsukachi's office. It was easy enough to find the conference room when most of the officers with boxes were heading to it. Spotting Tsukachi was not hard at all. He was at the back of the room poring over a bunch of files laid before him. The detective's gaze never left those files even as officers placed more and more boxes in front of him. Shota took the man's moment of distraction to study the board standing behind the busy man. He couldn't make much sense of what he was seeing since it was too far away, but he could make out the images of crime scenes. Crime scenes plural, as there were dozens of pictures tacked onto the board of different locations but all with the same subject, a charred body with a file fixed to the chest. Looking around at the contents strewn about the table, he could see that all the files were identical to the ones in the photos. Every file was a plain vanilla folder, like any you'd get at an office supply store, with a boxy stamp in red ink that simply read, Pheonix. He turned away from the files and addressed the man, now adding something to the board. You called me for a murder case? He drawled, making the detective whip around to meet his eye. I don't do murder investigations, Tsukachi. I know, but we're desperate. He sounded so defeated and, now that he wasn't burying his nose in files, Shota could see how tired he was. He had dark circles under his eyes that could rival the hero's. The pro relented at the exhaustion the detective had radiating off him and circled the table to stand in front of the board. What's the details? First body was found about 5 years ago. His eyebrow rose slightly before he schooled his expression back to normal and hummed for the man to continue. The victim's name was Kamitani Yoru, a convicted criminal who got out on good behavior. What was the crime? Shota questioned as he plucked the photo of Kamitani's mugshot off the whiteboard. Fairly normal-looking man, save for the haunted look in his eyes and sunken cheeks. He put the image back as Tsukachi handed over one of the many Pheonix-labeled folders. Inside the folder he found a record of every crime the victim was found guilty of with photos of the crime scenes to boot. How did they let this man out of prison? He couldn't hide the distaste in his voice as he eyed the photos. No idea, Tsukachi admitted. We believe this Pheonix person killed him because they didn't think Kamitani paid for his crimes. What makes you think that? Shota asked, handing the file back to the detective who handed him an identical folder in return. He didn't open it yet, waiting for the other man to continue. Every one of Phoenix's kills have similar files left with the body, as you can see. The dark-haired man gestured to the board. Each victim was either found not guilty or released early. He nodded along, finally opening up the folder to find records of one Itoyume. So a violent vigilante. He hummed in acknowledgement, barely looking at the file he's holding before setting it on the table behind him. The pro glanced over all the boxes and folders spread out on the conference table. The boxes had even more Pheonix-stamped folders shoved in them, and he could understand why the detective was so stressed. They killed all these people? How haven't I heard of this before? The department was trying to keep it under wraps since we have no idea what this person looks like. Tsukachi let out a deep sigh as he followed Shota's gaze. The murders stopped for a few months and we thought we were about to have a cold case. But? He prompted when the officer paused. I think you should see for yourself. The man switched on a TV in the corner that the hero had missed and he moved out of the way to give Shota a proper view. On screen was a woman with fair skin and powder white hair clutching a paper in her hands as her blue eyes stared into the camera. The bar scrolling under her read something that made his brain stall. Pro hero found dead in alleyway. There was an image beside her of another woman with sparkly hair, glitter, he realized. He'd personally never met her, but he'd heard of her in passing and seen her merchandise in stores before. From all he'd heard, she sounded like a good hero, and the way the news anchor was talking about her only cemented that notion, until it took a turn. Despite all the lives Glitter has saved, a folder found with her body reveals a troubling truth. The image of Glitter fades away to the beginnings of, what looked like, a press conference. The Hero Public Safety Commission held a press conference this morning addressing the contents. The video of said conference zoomed in right as the president took position at the podium. The ash-blonde woman tapped the papers in her hands on the podium before speaking. It has come to our attention that one of the heroes we have given a license to has been involved in business we do not support. The actions of Glitter went on without our knowledge and, if we had known, her license would have been suspended. She bent into a deep bow. We are deeply sorry for allowing a person like her to be responsible for your safety. The video paused there and zoomed out as the news anchor began to speak again. Shota wasn't paying any attention to it as his mind reeled with information. They had another hero killer on their hands, one that had receipts to back up the murder. This is worse than Stain. He found himself muttering, catching the detective nod in agreement as he shut off the TV. In more ways than one. Tsukachi scrubbed a hand against his face in exhaustion. For Stain we at least have a physical description, the man spoke, voice muffled by his hand before he retracted it. No one's even seen Pheonix and they don't leave anyone alive that we can question. So we have nothing, great. He glared down at all the files, each one of these represented a dead person. There were hundreds of folders on the table. Hundreds. Pheonix had managed to kill more people than the hero killer ever did and they've done so without being seen at all. Now they're after heroes. We're screwed. Was all he managed to say, and that was all he was thinking. They're screwed. If Pheonix keeps killing heroes and leaving these files, the HPSC will run out of excuses. The commission would fall apart. The next day, the commission told Izuku he did a good job. They showed him the news coverage Pheonix got and he wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, exposing Glitter had pushed for a reform in Hero Commission guidelines. On the other, he'd killed Glitter and was being celebrated by the commission for it. It was an odd situation, to say the least, and he felt surprisingly neutral about it all. The news coverage and uproar against the commission made him feel slightly giddy. He was getting back at the commission for what they made him do while doing the thing they told him to. And, for the first time, Izuku looked forward to his next mission. That was a sick thing to think, he knows that, but he weighed the pros and cons. The pros were being as close to a hero as he could by taking out the bad people and getting back at the commission through their reputation. The con was the killing. A big hurdle to overlook, one that was hard for him to overlook at first. He'd taken weeks to overcome it. He still wasn't comfortable with it, but then he'd imagine the bad press and would forget. So he guessed spite was a great motivator to jump that hurdle. They hadn't directed him to kill another hero yet, but he was gathering intel on, who he assumed to be, his next target. He honestly wouldn't have expected who they threw at him to study. By all accounts, the guy was a great hero, friendly with minimal property damage. Then he started digging and began wondering how this guy even got a license. Yamazaki Run. Hero name, Honey. Quirk, Honey Badger. All basic information that he's not too interested in. The quirk was cool but not groundbreaking, he had a head of a honey badger. No, what caught Izuku's eye was his background. It took a lot of digging to locate, only made easier with the HPSC's access codes, but he discovered that Honey had been in a gang in middle school. Not too unusual, children do weird things. Then he sees that the man was put in juvenile prison more than once for assault. He was really starting to question the judicial system because Yamazaki got out of longer punishment for good behavior. Now he can excuse it if the guy got his act together in high school, but he didn't. Even as he was studying at a hero school, he got reported for unlicensed quirk usage against a civilian but got off with a scolding. Honestly, what is going on with the system? Then after becoming a fully fledged hero, he was spotted participating in an illegal fighting ring. Izuku would be impressed if he wasn't so frightened. They let this guy get a license? He lost what little faith he had in the commission at this information. It wasn't until a few days later that he figured out what he was going to do with the stuff he gathered. Saito had retrieved him like she normally would, but they turned down a hallway he'd never been down before. All the doors in this hallway were closed except for the one they were heading towards. The inside was small with only a bench and mirror in the space. His eyes were drawn to the items laying on the bench though. Saito noticed this and spoke. "This is your costume. Suit up and knock on the door when you're done, don't put on the helmet." Then she left, closing the door behind her. The helmet in question was a black motorcycle helmet with a red visor and other red accents. He picked up the top, a black turtleneck that had holes in the back for his wings. He needed to set it down as he stripped out of his shabby clothes. The pants he slipped on were dark gray cargo pants, fitted at the ankle but overall baggy. Next he stepped into the red boots with black soles. They were heavier than regular shoes, harder at the toe too. He spent a moment admiring them. They were slightly shiny in the light, a nice crimson red like his favorite shoes before. The 9-year-old shook his head to shoo that thought away and picked up the top he'd been holding before. That was a struggle to put on as it seemed to be fitted, therefore hugging his body uncomfortably tight while he forced his wings through the holes. Afterwards, Izuku took a second to look at himself in the mirror. It was the first time in a while that he felt cool and he hadn't even finished putting the whole thing together. Now eager to see the final product, he pulled on the rest of the gear. First were the gloves, black fingerless ones that went all the way up to his elbows. Second was the red utility belt which was easy enough to clip on. Lastly were the crossbow straps in matching red that he fumbled with for a bit. Then it was all done. He grabbed the helmet and resumed his position in front of the mirror. He looked cool, almost older. The boy smiled at himself before knocking on the door for Saito to lead him to his mission. The mission they assigned for him was exactly what he expected: kill Honey. Though the one major difference was that he'd be going out to track the man. This was groundbreaking for Izuku, incredibly exciting too. He hadn't seen the outside of this building in years and was itching to go out. He wasn't allowed to leave just yet as they had an impromptu lesson for him to fulfill another requirement. But, when that was done, the commission led him down to 2 large doors. He thought that would have opened to reveal the outside world, but it was only a garage. The real outside world came into view after they exited the parking garage in a car. Izuku drank in every detail he could see, which wasn't much on account of it being nighttime. Even still, he couldn't mask the wonder in his eyes as the lights from buildings whizzed by and how beautiful the sky was with its spatter of stars. It was all so breathtaking. The car didn't stop moving until the lights from the city faded into decrepit buildings and shady alleyways. He was directed towards a warehouse by Saito and instructed to put on his helmet before leaving. When she deemed him ready, he was let out into the night. The boy took in a deep breath of the fresh air, relishing how nice it felt in his lungs. He didn't start moving towards the building until he'd gulped in a few healthy breaths. The warehouse in question seemed alive with activity. A glance in the window yielded a familiar scene from Honey's file. A fighting ring. Izuku took to the roofs with a few flaps of his wings and perched on the edge to watch the doors. He'd have to wait for the event to be over and follow Honey to a secluded location. The wait wasn't long at all, a man with a badger head stumbling out only minutes after the boy had settled. He spread his wings out and began the silent flight following Honey. It took a couple streets for him to decide it was secluded enough and he let himself ease down towards the ground. The pro didn't seem to notice him, too busy fumbling with something in his hands that Izuku couldn't see. He debated just setting him alight now, but then he remembered the other request that he was instructed to do and had to pivot. He needs Honey's phone, so his best course of action was to knock him out, grab the phone, then light him up. With a nod to himself, the boy rushed forward with his hand poised to strike. Whatever had happened in the ring must have left the hero more exhausted than he'd thought because he went down with only a punch to the neck. He eyed the man for any movements, any twitch indicating that he'd wake up, but no such sign came. As it turns out, the item Honey had been messing with was his phone, which had got dark with inactivity. No matter, the commission prepared him for this. He crouched down by his target, grabbing his hand and pressing the thumb down on the screen. When it turned on, he continued to use the man's hand to navigate towards the icon he'd studied minutes prior. He didn't understand the point of doing this, didn't understand why he was settling up the camera to face Honey. Was the commission just desperate to see him kill every target? Did they get some sick satisfaction from watching? He'll probably never know, and he supposed it didn't matter in the long run. He tapped the button to start a live stream, watching as viewers poured in, confused by the sudden stream and concerned by the body laying on the ground. Izuku didn't bother sticking around to read, he had a mission to complete. The commission spent hours coaching him just for this moment, and he didn't want to know what would happen if he slipped up. So he rounded to stand in view of the camera, crouching down so he was on full display. From a bag he'd been forced to carry here, he pulled out a file he'd compiled throughout the week and held it up with the stamped name in view. Then came the part he always dreaded. Burning the target. Flames flickered to life on his wings and, in a swift, practiced motion, he launched them at the pro-hero's prone form. Honey woke briefly, only enough to scream in agony as the fire ate its way through his flesh and muscle. Those cries died of fast, and he snuffed out the remaining embers before stepping towards the body. He flapped his wings a little to cool off the corpse enough to place the file on his chest without worrying about damaging it. Finally, the last step of the plan. He turned back to the phone, delivering a similar treatment to its owner before flying off towards the agreed-upon rendezvous point. He hopes he did the job they expected of him. The first message came at 1 am while Shota was on patrol, followed by dozens of chimes in rapid succession. The pro fished his phone out of his pocket and turned it on. What he read made his blood run cold. Pheonix broadcasted execution of pro-hero, Honey. Followed closely by a message from Tsukachi with a linked video which he instantly clicked. And, there, on full display, was the villain Tsukachi's been tracking for years. There was no doubt about it, it was him. The file flourished before the camera was proof enough, but the execution, and that was exactly the proper word for it, was the nail in the coffin. Pheonix had made himself known. He was taunting them. Izuku was being followed. He had been for some time now. He could feel eyes on him from the moment he'd land in the city to the moment he'd head back to the commission. This led him to believe that whoever was watching him didn't have access to a flight quirk, as the feeling disappeared whenever he took off. The consistency at which he'd be located by this mysterious person was too high for it to not be some tracking quirk. Although, if that were the case, then they'd try to find him at the building he spends the most of his time in, the HPSC headquarters. Then again, no villain, if this was a villain, would dare go into that building. He didn't bring the potential security breach to the commission, mainly because he wanted to see where this would go on his own, to have one thing for himself that they wouldn't force from him. It was a strange thing to be comfortable with, being followed, but he didn't really see the problem with it. The stalker had yet to attack him, so that had to count for something. Actually, he wouldn't see this mystery person until months later, and, by then, Pheonix had taken out 5 pros. The boy was just wrapping up with another assassination when the sound of approaching footsteps made him halt in place. The footfalls didn't slow or stop with his paused motion, so he quickly released the folder he'd been placing to whip around. His wings flared out threateningly, warning the intruder of imminent danger if they persisted. Now turned around, Izuku could see his stalker. It was a man with gray hair and small circle sunglasses perched on his long nose. The man smiled, a smile missing a single tooth in the front, as he held his hands up in a peaceful gesture. "Calm down, I mean no harm." Izuku didn't drop his defensive stance. "Who are you?" He nearly jumped at the sound of his voice distorted through the helmet. He never spoke with the helmet on before, never needed to, so it was jarring to hear such a deep electronic voice coming from himself. The stranger, on the other hand, didn't look put off by the tone as Izuku was. He simply lowered one of his hands and began reaching into his pocket. This motion set the boy more on edge, and he changed his stance, ready to attack if he pulled out a weapon. "Cool it, just grabbing a card," the man said, taking out the card as stated and holding it out for Izuku to take. "Name's Jiren and you're the elusive Pheonix." He shifted but didn't move to take the card, not knowing what this guy was planning. Seeing that Izuku wasn't moving, he sighed and spoke again. "It's an invite to the underground." The underground. The thing the commission had been training him for this whole time. He was finally in. Izuku dropped his stance and stepped towards Jiren, taking the card from his hand. It was plastic, plain black with gold embellishments including a golden chip. He flipped it over to check the other side, coming face to face with the name Pheonix printed in the same gold. He turned it back over and looked back at the gray-haired man. "It's an access card," he explained. "The underground is exclusive. Only those with cards can get in." Jiren reached out and tapped the card still in Izuku's hand. "Had this one made for you after your first pro kill, but had no idea what you looked like until the Honey video. Started to track you down after that. Why have you been following me if you want to give me this? He moved his hand, and the card, away from Jiren. I needed to know for sure that it was really you. The broker shrugged. The charred bodies weren't enough proof? Izuku quizzed, raising an eyebrow under the helmet. Jiren raised his hands in that same peaceful manner he'd taken before. In my defense, you're a lot shorter in real life. Flight is easier with a smaller body. He slid the card into his pocket as muttered those practiced words. The Hero Commission expected that Izuku would be questioned about his size. After all, he was just a kid. Villains would have caught on that he was far too young if they didn't have a cover. Thus the mutation makes me small lie was created. A good enough excuse in the time of quirks. Meant no offense by it. Jiren reassured, glancing down at a watch before looking back at Pheonix. Anyways, wanted to hand it off myself so I could lead you to the entrance. Also because I wanted to meet the man responsible for killing 5 pros in only a few months. Izuku gestured for the stranger to lead the way and Jiren immediately turned on his heel. The green-haired boy followed behind the man at a bit of a distance, still wary of the adult. What kid wouldn't be while following a stranger, especially when it's down dark alleys? He was content to just walk in silence as they went deeper into the city, down filthier and filthier streets. Jiren didn't share this sentiment. So why'd you start killing heroes? Really not liking the topic, Izuku remained silent. A silence the man took to mean he was free to keep talking. I get it, not a sharing type. Though, I suppose, the reason can be inferred with the files you leave behind. Hard to mistake them for anything other than justice, right? He barked out a laugh while Izuku just grimaced. Jiren continued on, undeterred by his companion's lack of reaction. Same ideals as Stain, still can't get him to join the underground. Thought you'd be the same, so I'm surprised you're following me. The broker squeezed down a narrow passage, waving for him to follow when he stuttered to a stop. Just down here then we're there. He promised, retreating further into the darkness. Izuku should have taken this as a sign to bolt, but the commission wouldn't let him hear the end of it if he did, so he squeezed in after him. They paused after a short walk, Jiren opening some steel cellar doors and stepping to the side to allow the younger of the two entry first. Izuku hesitantly descended the stairs, coming to a landing with another door. This door had a scanner beside it, likely the means to unlock the door. Scan the card I gave you. Jiren called down from where he was still stepping down the stairs. Izuku did as directed, lifting the card up and pressing the golden chip to the scanner. It blinked green with a little chime, the screen now displaying a message welcoming him. He tried the handle and eased the door open only to be hit with the stench of cigarettes and alcohol. It was a bar. A nice bar at that. It had a jukebox in the corner to the left of the bar, which was to Izuku's right. Booths lined each wall while tables filled the empty space in between. There was a pool table opposite the bar at the back wall, and TV hung everywhere displaying different channels. Jiren squeezed past Izuku, making the boy realize he'd stopped in the doorway, and he quickly moved out of the way. The man didn't seem to notice as he started to lead him to a booth by the pool table. He plopped down heavily into the booth and motioned for Izuku to sit as well. He sat a little more awkwardly than Jiren, who was practically lounging in the seat as he lit up a cigarette. His gut reaction was to ask if that was allowed, the smoking, but didn't want to sound like a wimp, so he kept his mouth shut. Want one? The man asked, offering the box to him. If Izuku wasn't sure before that passed as an adult, that definitely changed his mind. Unless this adult didn't care about underage smoking, which is always a possibility. Don't smoke. He replied, folding his wings in a bit when he realized he was blocking the walkway. Booths were so uncomfortable to sit in, it felt like he was being pushed into the table with how little room there was for his wings. Suit yourself, the gray-haired man shrugged. So, what do you think? Of the underground, I mean. Izuku took another glance around the bar as he debated a reply. There was a woman with dark skin and white hair going around to the two occupied tables with drinks and food. One table had a very drunk-looking man with his face pressed into its wood surface. The other had 3 people sitting muttering in hushed tones over a map or something Izuku couldn't really see. The bartender was a grisly-looking guy with a thick beard and scarred face. He looked like he could kill someone with his bare hands. He was serving a woman at the bar while engaging in a deep conversation with another woman. In all honesty, he expected the underground to be more alive, and he told Jiren as much. The man huffed a laugh with a little shake of his head. Normally it is, but I thought it would be better to have some quiet, so I brought you on a dead day. Izuku turned his attention back to Jiren and crossed his arms over his chest as he eyed the man. You're talking as if there's something you want to discuss with me. Nothing like that, he shook his head while waving over the waiter. Just wanted to get to know you. I was curious how you dug up so much dirt on so many people. 2 whiskeys. He directed the last bit to the woman waiting tables. The waiter wrote it down and left shortly after, leaving the two alone once more. Why don't you take your helmet off? We're all friends here, no one will sell you out. I'd prefer to keep it on. Izuku glared from behind the visor as Jiren shook his head almost fondly. The notion confused the boy because why would a villain be fond of him? I can respect the secrecy. The man SCKED on his cigarette one last time before snubbing it out in an ashtray that Izuku hadn't noticed before. He'd been too focused on the stranger in front of him to care much about the contents on the table. You didn't answer my question from before. He continued on. How'd you manage to get so much sheet on pro heroes? To emphasize how curious he was, the man leaned forward in his seat, resting his crossed arms on the table. Izuku narrowed his eyes even more, not that Jiren could see, before growling out his reply. None of your business. The gray-haired man's eyebrows raised at the aggressiveness and he raised his hands in a placating gesture. Apologies for that. He lowered his hands once more. I'm a broker, it's my job to gather information and my curiosity gets the better of me sometimes. The boy went to reply but the waiter returned and the words died on his tongue. She settled down 2 glasses in front of Jiren and he slid one towards Izuku. The woman didn't bat an eye at this, not caring that this man's company was child-sized, and retreated back towards the bar. He didn't touch the drink that had been placed before him, instead watching the broker sip at his own glass. Not a drinker either? Jiren questioned when he'd downed his whiskey. No, Izuku responded simply, pushing the glass back towards the adult. Said adult just shrugged and downed that drink as well. Is this all you wanted to do? Show me the underground and question me. Jiren shook his head, moving the glasses out of the way and reaching down into his pocket. You intrigue me, so I'm offering you something I don't often give out. Izuku tensed at the ominous words and the reaching but that eased when the man plopped a phone onto the table. The boy grabbed it curiously, turning it on to see the contacts with the only one present belonging to Jiren. It's a burner phone. He explained. If you ever have the need to contact me, do so with this. I'll know it's you. The broker set some yen on the wooden surface as payment for the drink, placing one of the empty glasses on it before sliding out of the booth. It was nice meeting you, Pheonix. I hope to see you again. Then he left, leaving Izuku to stare at the phone for a minute before he too got up and left. He returned to the commission and told them about what happened. He didn't bring up the phone. In the days following his run-in with Jiren, the commission had decided it was too much of a risk for him to remain in the headquarters. Thus, he was relocated to a home in the woods that was far away from the commission's building. It was a large 2-story house, fully paid for by the HPSC with Wi-Fi and filtered water. Izuku had to go through a crash course in living on his own with lessons on cooking, budgeting, and socializing. Then he was brought to his new home and left to his own devices for the first time in years. The first thing he did was explore the house. He started by examining the Genkan. It was a bigger space than what he'd expected, sunken into the floor with a raised platform that held a closet behind 2 sliding doors. There was a bench to the right of the front door that he sat on to remove the shoes the commission had given him the day before. Beside the bench were his boots that they must have brought the day prior. Stepping up out of the Genkan, the boy slid on the house slippers and started down the empty hallway towards the main living space. The hallway was completely bare, devoid of any personality, and the main room was much the same, designed for efficiency, not comfort. The first thing he spotted entering the space was the dining table. It was large and stained in a light tone with matching chairs positioned around it that had red cushioned seats. Further into the space was the living room. 2 couches were set up in an L shape, with one pushed against the right wall and one with its back turned towards him. The wall across from the couch closest to him was a large window with a sliding door to the backyard. The left wall had a large flat-screen TV mounted to it with a TV stand stained in the same color as the dining table. In the center of the living room was an oval coffee table with white coasters stacked neatly in the middle. Izuku walked further into the room, turning around to see a pristine kitchen with the same colored stained cabinets. A stove was at the center of the U-shaped counters, its stainless steel finish contrasting starkly with the quartz countertops. Turning to the left wall, he saw a stainless steel fridge and sink sunken into the countertop. Opening the fridge revealed that it was fully stocked with the means to create the diet-specific meals the HPSC taught him to prepare. He took a moment to open every drawer and cabinet to locate all the appliances and utensils he'd need, before he moved to a door on the left wall opposite the dining table. In this room was a simple white bathroom. A tub-shower combo was to his right with a sink and toilet to his left. The shower was stocked with generic soap and shampoo while the cupboard under the sink was loaded with refills of said items as well as toilet paper. He left this room to open the door beside the bathroom door, coming face to face with a stairwell. One led upstairs while the other led downstairs. He decided to come back to this and opened another door beside that one. This one was an office space, with sparse bookshelves, a desk with a laptop on it, and an office chair. The only notable items in this room were the stacked vanilla folders in the desk drawer and the Pheonix stamp on top of the desk with the ink pad. Izuku exited that room relatively quickly, not wanting to think about the victims the HPSC no doubt have lined up. He instead heads back to the staircase and goes up. The boy can see another bathroom at the end of a hall of doors, so he decides to go there last. He checks each room, all of which are basic bedrooms with a bed, dresser, and nightstand. The room closest to the bathroom is the only different room with its own bathroom attached, a larger bed, and a closet. The additional items in the room, such as an alarm clock and his clothes, led him to understand that this was his bedroom. It was just as basic as the other ones, lifeless just like the room he and Keigo shared at the commission. He resolved to change this in the years he'd be living here. And he did. In the 2 years since moving in, he'd personalized some of the main spaces. It wasn't by much, just added more color in bed sheets or blankets scattered around the house. His budgeting lesson with the commission helped him save up enough to buy decorative pieces like art and little knickknacks. It also helped that Keigo would stop by whenever he could get away from the HPSC and bring with him things for Izuku's house. It was on one of these days that the 11-year-old learned of what Keigo had been up to. Izuku was finishing up some research on his next target when he heard a knock on the door. Stretching with a grunt, the boy got to his feet and trudged down the hall to the door. He peeked through the eye-hole to see Keigo rocking back and forth on the ball of his feet. The now graduated hero student was dressed fully in his costume, signifying that he just got off a shift. Izuku pulled the door open, to which Keigo beamed at him and held out a strange taxidermied bird. He eyed it for a second before fixing the man with an unimpressed look. "Cut me some slack, Zuku, ran out of ideas." Keigo chuckled, pushing past the younger boy to tow his boots off and slip on a pair of slippers. They were an ugly pink pair that he'd gotten the blonde as a joke, which backfired because Keigo loved them. "Thought you'd be more creative than a dead bird." Despite his words, the green-haired boy took the bird from his brother before closing the door and following him further into the house. "Creativity isn't my game." The blonde turned to face Izuku for a moment, walking backwards while he spoke before turning back around. Once in the main living space, Keigo made a beeline for the kitchen and to the fridge. "Got anything good to eat? I swear, you only visit for food." Izuku rolled his eyes with an exasperated sigh as he set the stuffed bird on the table. "Yeah, and you never have anything good." The man closed the fridge door, a jovial smile plastered on his face as he leaned against the counter. Izuku gave his brother a severe look. "Because, unlike someone, I don't have a disposable income." Keigo blew a raspberry and pushed off the countertop to step into the dining room. "Then get a job." He flicked under the boy's nose as he passed on his way to the living room. The green-haired boy turned around to follow after the blonde. "Yeah, 'cause the commission would be thrilled with me working at a supermarket," he retorted, voice dripping in sarcasm. "Get an online job." The hero shrugged, popping down onto the couch with his arms thrown over the back behind him. "Like cellular analysis work or something. You're terrible at coming up with things." Izuku remained standing, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "No, think about it." Keigo sat straighter, retracting his arms from their relaxed position to gesture wildly in front of him. "You have access to the hero network through the commission, right? Just make an anonymous account and hand out an analysis of a wanted criminal. Build a reputation, then start charging." He would admit that the idea was intriguing, but there were a lot of moving parts he'd have to consider to make that work, or the HPSC would find out. Like the IP address, the commission could trace that account to find the source, or any hero could. There's also the issue of how he'd get the money into an account when he doesn't have a bank account not tied to the commission. "You're thinking about it." The winger hero's voice cut through his thoughts and he shot the man a sharp glare. Keigo held his hand up in defense as the younger pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm not thinking about it." The blonde gave him an incredulous look. "Okay, I was thinking about it, but it would be way too much work to be worth it." He lowered his hand to stare right at his brother. "Anyways, why are you here?" "Ah, I wanted to celebrate with you." Keigo threw his arms up in an excited gesture, wings twitching excitedly behind him. "Celebrate what?" "I started up my own agency." Izuku's heart dropped at the revelation. He always hated when they talked heroes, it was a sore subject to him. He couldn't be one, so why bother? But he supposed that Keigo could talk freely because he'd gotten what he wanted. "Oh, cool." The shift in tone did not go unnoticed by the blonde and he watched Izuku with a worried expression. "I think you should go." What? The hero stood up with confusion written on his face. He didn't look at him, didn't even speak. Keigo, realizing defeat, started towards the exit. He got all the way to the Genken before speaking again. "See you later, Zuku." Then Izuku was alone again. He didn't know if it was because he was frustrated with Keigo or jealousy that made him do what he did next, but next thing he knew, he was making an untraceable IP and creating an account on the Hero Network. He dubbed himself Firehawk and made his first post. Every time he'd take out a hero, he'd post on the network a few days later. He already built up a following by the time his 12th birthday hit. Then he spent the next 2 years killing heroes and completing commissions for heroes. He'd almost forgotten all about the underground world between all the work he's been doing. It's only when Madam President reaches out that he remembers he has other duties to attend to. So, he suited up in his villain gear and departed from the house at midnight. He thought he'd have forgotten where the entrance to the underground was in 6 years since he'd last been there, but he supposed his memory was sharper than he assumed as he landed right before the familiar cellar doors. The green-haired boy pulled them open, slipping inside and down the stairs till he reached the scanner. He had to pat down his costume to locate where he'd put the card to let him in, but scanned it when he found it. The inside was much the same as his last visit, only with more people littering the tables and bar. Pheonix took a step in, letting the door close behind him as he tucked his wings in to prevent them from hitting anyone. The boy went completely unnoticed by everyone except one very familiar man. "Bless my eyes, is that Pheonix?" He turned towards the door he'd just entered from to find Jiren smiling at him with that crooked grin. "Been ages, where have you been?" "Busy," he replied simply. "I see that. You're all over the news." Jiren hummed before he began herding the winged boy towards a booth. The man was about to speak again when the waiter came back and he was forced instead to order. "Still don't drink?" he questioned. "No, I do not." The man then ordered one whiskey and watched as the waiter left, Pheonix never taking his eyes off the adult. "Well, I'm glad I caught you." The broker addressed him at last, propping his elbows on the table while steepling his fingers together. "Was about ready to call you if I didn't see you again soon." Pheonix leaned forward, giving Jiren his undivided attention. Whatever had the man this serious meant that it was important. In turn, it would be information to pass on to the commission. "There's this villain group that's trying to amass followers for a mission." The man continued, pausing to accept the drink from the waiter. "What makes you think I'd be interested? You're all about reshaping hero society, right?" Pheonix nodded suspiciously. "Well, attacking the top hero school would definitely shake up people's opinions on them." "They're planning on attacking UA?" he asked incredulously, leaning back as best he could in his seat without crushing his wings. Jiren shrugged noncommittally. "They haven't told me their exact plan, but I think a strategist like yourself would be an asset to them." Izuku wasn't all too interested in joining a villain group, especially one planning to attack UA of all places, but it was his job to gather intel for the commission, so he sighed and mimicked Jiren's posture. "I'll be interested in a meeting with them before I decided anything. That's all I ask." The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later and Pheonix met Jiren at the underground entrance where they'd walk to the meeting location. The broker made simple conversation while the winged boy gave dry responses, not really paying attention to what was being said. He was more focused on engraving each detail of their surroundings to memory. He noted how the building became even more decrepit, almost abandoned. There was trash littered about everywhere, graffiti stretching across every wall while the buildings themselves were boarded up. The ominous walk was an almost exact copy of his last walk with Jiren, only this time he believed he was actually being led to his death. "Where are we going?" He cut off the man's sentence as he eyed up a neon sign that was blacked out. "Just a little further." Jiren deflected before continuing his ramble from where he left off. "As I was saying, have you ever met Stain?" Pheonix had heard of Stain before, either from people comparing them or from the people on the news. Although he'd never met the man in person or even seen what he looks like, he voiced as much to the older party. "Shame, think you two would have gotten along." He shrugged, grabbing a cigarette from a box and lighting it. "Want one? You know I don't smoke." "Worth a shot." Jiren laughed, skiing on the tobacco-filled paper as he turned down an alleyway. The boy was hesitant to follow as this alley definitely looked like an alleyway used for murder. Hell, it looked like an alleyway he had murdered in. He pushed down his reservation and followed behind the man. They only walked for a short while before Jiren stopped in front of a dingy door. A study of the building gave the same impression as the entrance, run down. Windows were broken and boarded up, the only sign of life in said building was the golden light spilling out onto the street. The broker didn't even knock, just entering like he owned the place, and Pheonix was resigned to just follow. He'd come this far already. The inside was a lot nicer than the outside could ever hope to be, all brick walls with one wall lined with shelves of alcohol bottled, an L-shaped bar positioned with the shorter side facing the front door, maroon stools set up the long way, a plush maroon couch was facing a TV mounted to the far wall with a purple curtain-covered doorway beside it. The entire bar was alight with a warm orange glow emanating from behind the bottles and the light from the TV. Pheonix's eyes were drawn towards the person behind the bar, or at least he thought it was a person. It was a tall figure with dark purple mist swirling around all their features, but he could clearly see the smart suit vest the person was wearing as well as the metal neck brace. "Welcome, Jiren and company." The mist spoke, setting down the glass he'd been cleaning. "Your usual? No thanks, Kurogyri, on business." The broker turned down while gesturing towards Pheonix. Kurogyri nodded and went back to cleaning the glass. How clean could one glass get? The teen's attention snapped away from the mist man to the couch where a new, slightly scratchy, voice spoke out. "Better be someone good unlike that dog NPC." The person rose from the couch and Pheonix examined him while the man stretched. Said man had pale blue hair to match his equally pale skin that looked irritated and was flaking slightly. "Need some lotion," he thought while carrying on his study, noticing just how gangly and tall the man was, the black long-sleeved shirt not helping with that image. The man turned around at last, eyes closed as he continued his stretches. He could see that the guy's face was just as pale and flaky as the rest of his skin. He looked almost sickly. Then his eyes opened, red irises locked onto him and he forgot all about that notion under the sharp gaze. This man screamed danger. This isn't an NPC. That strange word again, Pheonix had never heard someone be referred to as an NPC. He'd have to ask about it. "You've brought me a boss." And the weird way of speech continued, making him tilt his head a little in confusion. "Well, I figured if you're going to kill a hero then employ the best." Jiren clapped him on the back and the winged boy swiveled his head to glare at the man, not just for the unwanted contact but the revelation that they wanted him to kill a hero. He was no stranger to killing heroes, not anymore, but he'd have preferred to be told up front about what would be requested of him. Jiren had said he didn't know but that was clearly a lie. Undeterred by his glare, the broker continued speaking. "Pheonix is a natural at strategy. I'm sure you'll find a use for him." Pheonix went to say that he hadn't decided to join the mission yet, that he wouldn't be volunteered for a role he didn't understand, but the other part of his brain argued that the only reason he was here was for information. They were planning to kill someone and he needed to know when. The pale man looked thoughtful, glancing towards the screen of the TV which had gone dark with inactivity. "You would be a useful party member," he said contemplatively. "What has Jiren told you?" "Not much, just that you plan to attack UA." Pheonix replied, speaking for the first time since arriving. His filtered voice must have surprised the man because he jumped slightly while his eyes widened. Jiren spotted this reaction, laughing a little much to the man's displeasure. "Don't worry so much, Shigaraki, his voice startled me too." He didn't understand the surprise at voice. It wasn't that jarring, was it? Apparently it was, since Shigaraki seemed to take a moment to recollect himself. "What made you decide to meet with me?" he asked after a long pause, eyes boring into him. Izuku had to think about his response. The idea of attacking UA was a surprise at first, but the more he thought about it the more he liked the idea. Well, he didn't like the prospect of harming children but the idea of the backlash the commission would get was a strong driving point. Though he couldn't bring this notion up as his reason, so he had to think how the persona of Pheonix would feel. That reasoning came a lot quicker than he thought it would, almost like it was his own opinion. But that couldn't be right. He wasn't like Pheonix, was he? He shook that existential train of thought away and moved over to sit at one of the bar stools, back towards the bar. His wings pressed against the bar uncomfortably, but he didn't let it bother him as he started explaining. "The hero society is flawed beyond what I can solve myself. Killing 1 to 3 heroes a month isn't enough to reform anything." Shigaraki seemed intrigued and settled into the stool 2 seats away. "But going after the top hero school in Japan will shake the public's faith in the ones designed to protect them. It'll push for a total reformation of the system." Shigaraki smiled, a truly wicked smile, as he fixed Pheonix with a manic stare. "And what would you say to killing the symbol of peace?" That threw him for a loop. Kill the symbol of peace? He didn't think such a thing was even possible. How would one kill All Might? He questioned, spinning the stool so that he was facing the pale man. The man looked all too excited to indulge his question, also turning his stool to look at the teen. "We have a bioengineered beast that was designed to kill All Might at his best." "Bioengineered?" The green-haired teen voiced his question out loud without meaning to. He sounded too pushy, too eager for information. Though it seemed Shigaraki didn't mind the prodding as he excitedly continued. "Nomu is a creature with multiple quirks including shock absorption and super regeneration." Behind his visor, Phoenix's eyes widened and his eyebrows raised in surprise. Shock absorption and super regeneration? Was that even possible? He was skeptical of that being true so he just moved on. "When do you plan to attack?" The blue-haired man watched him with a surprised expression of his own and, when prompted about the change, Shigaraki laughed a bit. I thought you'd put up more fight about killing All Might as he's a good hero. I see your point and normally I would be against it. He had to pause to think about his next words. But taking down a pillar of society would require changes to be made. Pheonix shrugged, getting off the stool in order to stretch his wings. And you didn't answer my question. We're waiting for more details, he replied simply, also rising from his own stool. Shigaraki shambled back to the TV but didn't sit back down yet. I'll be in touch then. He filled the awkward silence, pulling out his burner phone in preparation to add a new number. I'd like to be involved in the planning process, if you wouldn't mind. Shigaraki looked giddy at the request, not at all what Pheonix would have expected from the boss of a villain organization. It was almost like a child in a toy store, not that he knew what that would look like anymore. I'd be honored to plan with such a high-profile boss. I'll get you his number, Pheonix. Jiren spoke for the first time since the meeting started, startling the winged teen a little, though no emotion showed other than his wings fluffing out a little. The older man held his hand out for the burner and Pheonix passed it to him. While Jiren punched in the number, the teen watched Shigaraki sit down on the couch and power on the TV. Things started to move on the screen and he found himself drifting towards it. Izuku had never indulged in TV, too busy researching heroes or doing commissions, so the figure flying across the tiny screen intrigued him. He didn't understand what was going on, a lot of fighting mainly being shown. It wasn't until he was practically leaning over that couch that he realized Shigaraki was controlling the character. What is this? He questioned, making the pale blue-haired man jump and whip around to face him. It's Skyrim. Pheonix tilted his head. You've never heard of Skyrim? He asked incredulously, flipping around on the couch to face the teen. You need to play it. I have something I need to do later. The green-haired boy responded. He wasn't lying when he said that. He had a commission that needed to be done. The villain wasn't deterred, waving his hand around dismissively. This motion made it more obvious that he was wearing artist gloves. 5-point contact Quirk. He thought. Just stop by tomorrow. Shigaraki was saying. He wanted to decline, but the need for more information made him sigh. All right, tomorrow. The man made an excited motion with his hand before righting himself in his seat and continuing his game. Pheonix went back to Jiren, who handed him the burner back. Then exited the bar and went home. Izuku thought that Shigaraki would have forgotten about his offer the other day, he hoped he had, but the man definitely didn't. The teen woke up at the ripe hour of 5 am to the burner phone ringing. He didn't have his helmet on so he didn't dare answer it, instead waiting for the ringing to stop. Only then did he pick the phone up off the nightstand to check the text left behind. Shigaraki Tamura, wake up. Pheonix, I am awake. Shigaraki Tamura, then why didn't you pick up? Pheonix, I don't answer calls. Shigaraki Tamura, whatever, are you still coming over? Pheonix, I suppose so. What time? Izuku placed the phone down as he waited for the reply and dragged himself out of bed to the closet. Opening it up, he pulled out his uniform to start getting dressed. While doing that, the teen glanced down at the burner. Shigaraki Tamura, now. He figured that would be the answer, so he pulled on the rest of the outfit, leaving off the belt and straps. He grabbed a book bag from the floor and slid his helmet in there. He'd put it on when he got closer to the bar. Pheonix, leaving now. He exited his room and walked down the hall to the bathroom to complete his morning routine. When done with that, he trudged down the hallway, down the stairs, and to the entryway where he stepped into his shoes. He tied them quickly, then left the house, locking the door behind him. It wasn't like anyone would break in since he lived in the middle of nowhere, but it was better to be safe than sorry. He thinks the only person who would stop by the house would be Keigo, but after the argument they had, he doubted he would. The boy spread his red wings and took off towards the underground entrance where it'd be easy to locate the bar from there. It was still dark out, slightly cold in this hour, but he didn't mind it. It was rather peaceful to be flying in the silence of early morning. It became even more pleasant when he reached the city. The lights from the street and buildings shining warmly, illuminating the inky black. By the time he reached the underground, the sky was shifting to a pink-orange as the sun rose. He decided to continue on foot, it would be less suspicious that way. The teen landed in the alleyway by the entrance and stepped out into the dawn light. People were just starting to mill about, no one sparing the winged teen any attention as he walked down the sidewalk. The journey to the bar was a lot nicer in the daytime than it was during the night with Jiren. That might have just been because the broker was present, but he also believed it was because the abandoned city was brighter. It made it less creepy. As he got closer to his destination, he reached into the backpack he's been carrying and puts on his helmet before continuing on. The light of day didn't do anything for the exterior of the bar, looking just as filthy as it had last night. Pheonix pushed open the door and stepped inside. Kurogiri was still stationed behind the bar, cleaning a glass like he had been the day before. Did this guy ever leave the bar? He wondered, looking around and not spotting Shigaraki. The mist man noticed his searching. Shigaraki Tamura is upstairs, he explained, pointing to the purple curtain. The teen gave him a grateful nod before ascending the stairs behind the curtain and exiting out into a large room. There was a kitchen to his left with a living space to his right. Shigaraki was sitting on one of the couches in front of a much larger TV, fiddling with a controller in his gloved hands. Pheonix didn't announce himself yet, deciding to take in the room first before doing anything else. The kitchen was standard, not as fancy as the one in the commission's home but functional. A table was placed beside the kitchen with enough seats for 10 people. The living space was a mess of couches and beanbag chairs all placed in different orientations. It looked relatively cozy with the few lamps scattered about that painting the room in soft oranges. He stepped further into the room, the floor creaking underfoot and making the blue-haired man turn around. "Pheonix," he greeted with barely contained excitement as he waved him over. Pheonix approached slowly, glancing towards the screen to see a different game than what the villain was playing yesterday. Shigaraki noticed this and grabbed something from the coffee table, handing it to the teen. It was an interesting case with a woman surrounded by green and a strange figure behind her. The cover read Hades 2, and Pheonix flipped it over curiously to read the description. While he did that, the lanky man was messing around with the console and another case. The green-haired boy set the game cover he was holding down on the coffee table where Shigaraki had grabbed it from. He watched the screen change to a title screen of Skyrim as his host placed the other game disc back into the case. "We can start with Skyrim, and if you don't like it, I don't see why you wouldn't. We can change games." He whispered part of his sentence while handing the wing teen a controller. Pheonix eyed it cautiously for a second before looking up at Shigaraki. "I don't know what to do with this." The next few hours were spent with Shigaraki teaching him the controls and letting him explore the weird game world. Eventually, the man had gotten frustrated with his pathetic attempts to play the game and placed a new game in. It was a rhythm game, and Isuku found that he quite enjoyed the more structured gameplay over the open-ended game of Skyrim, much to Shigaraki's chagrin. The man became bored just watching and had snatched the controller from the teen to try his hand at it. Turns out, the villain was terrible at rhythm games and threw the controller in frustration. This motion made Isuku laugh, and, wow, when was the last time he laughed? Shigaraki had been just as surprised as Isuku at the noise before the man grumbled. "You sound like a broken router." Isuku didn't know what a router was but couldn't stifle the laugh regardless. The older of the two turned away to hide the small smile that stretched across his face at the weird laughter. He'd never smiled so much before, his cheeks were beginning to hurt from the unfamiliar strain of it. He never thought he'd be laughing over video games or dumb shit with a villain before, but here he was. He was starting to think of Shigaraki as less of a villain and more like a person. The commission would throw a fit at that notion, but, then again, he hadn't told them about this villain group yet, and now, he didn't really want to. Telling them would mean no video games, which he just decided he likes, and no laughing. Izuku made a decision at that moment. He wouldn't be telling the HPSC about this until he has to. This was going to be something that was his and his alone. A friend. His laughter had long since died out and he was just catching his breath. The unusual sensation of laughing was harder to recover from. Shigaraki had managed to compose himself and was grabbing a new controller, as the one he had thrown broke. He handed the new controller to Izuku and went over to a shelf beside the TV that held other cases. "Do you want to play a multiplayer game?" the blue-haired man questioned. "Multiplayer? You really are a noob." He didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like an insult. "It's a game we can play together." "Oh, sure." Shigaraki sifted through the games before stopping on one and pulling it out. He couldn't tell what game it was from the angle he was sitting at until the man slid the game into the console. The image on the screen now was of two strange creatures that looked to be made of yarn with the title Unravel 2. The blue-haired man sat down beside him with his own controller and turned it on. Izuku copied his motion and turned his own controller on, accepting the role of player 2. His new friend? Selected the new game button and the two settled in to watch the opening cutscene. Just as it was ending, Kurogiri came up the stairs with a bag of something in his misty hand. "I've retrieved food for you, Shigaraki Tamura and company," he stated, setting down the paper bag on the coffee table while standing directly in front of the screen. Yeah, get out of the way before I dust you." Shigaraki snarled, glaring at the man until he left and set the controller down to rip the bag open. "Dust him? Is that your quirk?" Izuku questions while setting down his own controller as the man hands him a plastic container. "Yeah, my quirk is a disintegration quirk." He removed his fingerless glove and demonstrated this by pressing all 5 of his fingers down on the paper bag. Instantly, the bag crumbled away, allowing Shigaraki to grab the contents unhindered. The teen stared down at the item in his hand questioningly, popping open the lid to come face to face with a mouth-wateringly good meal. Some type of crispy meat on top of rice with onions. It looked nothing like the meals Isuku makes for himself. "Are you going to eat?" the man questioned, mouth full of his own food, the same meal as his. Isuku almost took his helmet off before he remembered the secrecy of his face and his hands froze mid-motion. "I can't." Shigaraki seemed to notice this and turned his head away, so he was looking at the wall instead. "I won't look." He felt a warmth in his chest, one he'd once felt with Keigo that had long since been forgotten. He felt comfortable, understood. The teen lifted his helmet just enough to leave his mouth uncovered and began eating. It was good, way better than the stuff the HPSC forces him to eat, and almost familiar. He'd had this before. He wanted to ask what it was, but restrained himself until the food was gone and he could slide his helmet back down. "Thank you," he started. "I've never had a meal like this before, at least, not in a while." The pale man turned back to look at him with a perplexed expression on his face. "Do you have someone controlling your diet or something?" He said it in a joking manner, sarcastic even. "Yes." Izuku answered honestly to the displeasure of his host. "Lame. And that was that?" They moved on to lighter topics like what the meal was, Katsudon, and other activities that they liked to do. They played for a bit, no controllers breaking this time despite how annoyed Shigaraki was getting with him. It was fun. He was having fun. Until he had to leave. Izuku had collected his backpack and was just standing up when he decided to speak. "Thank you for everything, Shigaraki." "Tamura. You can call me Tamura." The man rasped back. "You better stop by again to beat the game." He emphasized his point by pointing the game controller at him. Izuku raised his hands in mock defense. "I will, don't worry." He headed towards the stairs, pausing just before the first step. "Nix, you can call me Nix. See you later, Nix."
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.